Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 901, Doubts. When they heard about the existence or rather the presence of the Black Star, the celestial position warriors finally understood what had happened. The Black Star did not adorn the list of the most powerful weapons in the upper world, mostly because of the fact that it was just a pickaxe and not suitable as a weapon. However, it was a supreme divine weapon. This meant that the Black Star was extremely useful in certain scenarios. So one could definitely call it a treasure, and it would be easily worth a king's ransom. The middle-aged scholarly man named Delroy gave a slight nod. Ah, I see. No wonder she broke my enchanted barrier. I was curious just how someone from the lower world was able to do that. Turns out it wasn't her own strength. He had obtained a title from the Tower of Illusory. And a title of Asura was not to be taken lightly, no matter what its color. The title that the man had received was bronze, but was the highest bronze title one could get. That alone was enough to make him extremely proud of himself and equally confident in his abilities. To his knowledge, no warrior from the lower world could ever shatter his enchanted barrier. A law of causality that had with it associated a sort of relative defense was in that enchanted barrier. Who among the natives of the lower world could figure out how to use a law of causality? Yet that was his knowledge. And even though Delroy's thoughts were mostly correct, he had still underestimated the warriors of the lower world. For example, Eddie from the central region had once used the nameless saber to activate a law of causality, the life and death wind. This only partially violated Delroy's beliefs. Eddie did not know about the law of causality and had only lured the life and death wind over from the Netherworld River. Zen's situation was more or less the same as that. He did not comprehend any law of causality that belonged to him, but had merely relied on the one which was present inside the Black Star to destroy Delroy's enchanted barrier. There's no need to waste any more words now. We should just snatch the ancestral dragon and take it away. No wait, it is already hatched and has taken this woman as its mom. The imprinting can't be reversed. There's nothing we can do about it. Alas, all we can do is return to the upper world and think of some other means, the burly man remarked in a thoughtful tone. He was also a little curious as to why Dorothea and Woody had not tried to snatch the ancestral dragon away, but instead brought the woman here. Max, however, was smarter than the burly man. Seeing Dorothea's expression, he could see that something was up. Dorothea, did you discover something? What are you not telling us? He asked. Only then did Dorothea nod and reply, yes. I did make a few important discoveries. After a little bit of pause, she added with a smile, very important discoveries indeed. When everyone heard her cautious emphasis on the word, important, they became curious and turned their attention towards her. What important discoveries? Max was the one to ask. Woody laughed and rushed in front of Dorothea before she could reply. Dorothea found the location of the Tower of Crystal. It is somewhere inside this great world. What? The Tower of Crystal? Are you kidding me? Are you talking about that Tower of Crystal which is known as one of the 3 trial towers? Hasn't it been lost for so many years? There were many murmurs instantly. Is it true, Dorothea? Max asked in a clear voice. He paused for a moment and continued, Dorothea, is the Tower of Crystal really located inside this great world? Dorothea nodded in reply, yes, most certainly. This is the world that plays host to the Tower of Crystal. Oh my goodness. Max, we have been blessed indeed this time. If we were to find the tower. Although this evil dragon is a bit difficult to deal with, the value of the Tower of Crystal is immeasurable. The burly man said with a laugh. Delroy also nodded in affirmation. Both the Tower of Illusory and the Tower of Jade are currently packed with people. What's more, those 2 trial towers are far from enough. If we can find the Tower of Crystal, it would be a great contribution to our race. Dorothea, how do you know the whereabouts of the Tower of Crystal? Dorothea's response was astonishing. She pointed at Zen and said, I heard it from her. Crack. The burly man waved the giant sickle in his hand and hit it on the ground. He then walked towards Zen and asked in a cold voice, you, tell me the location of the Tower of Crystal. Zen stared indifferently at the burly man and did not answer him. He wasn't going to give in to rude orders. When he saw that the woman in front of him was treating him as if he was nothing, the burly man took 2 steps forward and tried to threaten her into responding. "Woman, I'll ask you a few more questions. If you're smart enough, you'll tell me what I want to know." He was only halfway through his threat when Dorothea interrupted him. "The most important thing that I discovered is not the Tower of Crystal's whereabouts," she said. The Tower of Crystal was a treasure whose value was beyond measurement to the celestial position race. In fact, to the 7 people standing here right now, it was incomparably precious. But even after, Dorothea was saying that the Tower of Crystal was not important. What was going on? The company was confused and looking at her with a complicated expression. Max asked in confusion, "What do you mean the Tower of Crystal is not important?" "Of course it is. What could be more important than that?" "Her." Dorothea pointed at Zen, and there were several gasps and a few groans. Ignoring that, she continued, "This woman said that she had been to the Tower of Crystal and had also been tested by the talent tablet. She even saw my father's name on it." "Master Gu," Max exclaimed. Odom's talent could only have been ranked in the first row, and he hadn't gotten a title from the Tower of Crystal, but talent was only one of the numerous aspects that decided a warrior's achievements. Even without such a feat, Odom was known as a powerful warrior and revered among the celestial position race. So when Max mentioned Dorothea's father, he still had to respectfully address him as Master Gu. Out of the 7 people present in the company, only Dorothea and the burly man had not received any titles from the talent tablet. Of the remaining 5, Max had obtained a silver title, and the other 4 all had bronze titles. Strictly speaking, Dorothea didn't have the right to join their team. The main reason why she was able to join this mission was because of her father, Odom. Dorothea nodded. "Such important information cannot be faked, so I believe that she has indeed entered the Tower of Crystal." "Even in that case, what is more important than the Tower of Crystal?" "Just stop beating round the bush," the burly man asked impatiently. "I told you, it's her," Dorothea said again. At this point, her words had already confused the other 6. What did this mean? The woman in front of them was indeed special, that much they could tell. There weren't many creatures in the whole universe who walked around with golden pupils. It was possible for some descendants of the genuine dragon, but a mere descendant of genuine dragon wasn't enough to pique their interest, and most certainly not Dorothea's. She said that she had obtained a title in the test of the talent tablet, so she can be considered a member of our celestial position race, Dorothea calmly explained. Hearing this, Delroy flashed a mocking smile. "She has obtained a title. Ha ha, as if someone from the lower world would actually be able to obtain a title in the Tower of Crystal. That is too far-fetched, Dorothea. What color is that title, and what title is it?" Among the warriors present, Delroy's title was the second best. He was concerned about Zen's title. I know. We still need to verify her title." After thinking for a while, Dorothea added, "But she said that she had obtained the golden title of celestial position." The moment Dorothea said those words, the other 6 men lost it and started laughing out loud. The one with the most intense reaction was Delroy. Though it wasn't physically that intense, he smiled arrogantly and then said, "Dorothea, you've gone mad. Do you know what you're talking about?" Even Max shook his head slightly and remarked, "Dorothea, you're still lacking in experience. How can you be so naive and believe something like that?" "Ha ha, Dorothea, that sounds ridiculous and you're better than to fall for that. What nonsense are you spouting?" The burly man also laughed. They simply could not believe Dorothea's words at all. In truth, Dorothea was also skeptical of Zen's words. After all, they were empty words, without any proof. However, her belief in Zen was based on her own judgment and she didn't care what the others thought. "Max, the Tower of Crystal has been lost since a long time ago. As far as I know, before it got lost, it had only opened for a short period of time and no one had ever managed to obtain a title from it. But this woman herself was the one who mentioned the golden title of the celestial position. If she didn't see it with her own eyes, how would she be able to speak of it? No such thing as a coincidence, right?" she asked. Delroy snorted lightly and said, "What if she got some information about our celestial position race from somewhere? Or perhaps someone she knew got the golden title? Someone else. There's no such possibility." Max shook his head. There were 100,000 supreme worlds in the upper world. The talents of every single race had already tried their best to go to the celestial position race's trial towers. In the history, there had been only 6 living creatures who had managed to obtain the golden titles of the celestial position. Even if there were millions of great worlds in the lower world, it was impossible for a creature of today's generation to obtain a golden title. Chapter 902, Verify. Max was very sure that the girl in front of him couldn't have obtained the title of golden celestial position. It wasn't that they, a group of martial artists from the upper world, were arrogant and looked down on the creatures that came from the great world of the lower world. In truth, there were numerous creatures in the millions of great worlds, and there were also many martial artists that had ascended to the upper world by showing great talent and a strong warrior spirit. There were many creatures that had made extraordinary achievements after they ascended to the upper world. Some of them had even become world lords or supreme lords. But, generally speaking, there was a great disparity between the martial artists of the lower world and those of the upper world. And such disparity meant that the warriors' martial arts cultivation in the lower world were greatly restricted since the time they were born. Restrictions existed everywhere. For instance, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the upper world was much more violent than that in the lower world. The creatures that nurtured by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the upper world were stronger than those nurtured by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the lower world. In addition, there was also great disparity in resources, inheritances, and more between the upper world and the lower world. For this reason, they couldn't believe what Dorothea said. Dorothea, don't forget the most important point. This woman said that she gained the recognition of the celestial position, but I couldn't sense the existence of the mark of our celestial position on her. She's lying, Delroy said again. Everyone's eyes flashed. They were so shocked by Dorothea's words that they forgot about what was truly important. To be acknowledged by the celestial position, one had to have his or her name on or above the second row of the talent tablet. If a person reached that level, the talent tablet would secretly put the mark of the celestial position on his or her body. Right now, they couldn't sense the mark on the woman's body. This meant that the woman was either lying, or had indeed entered the talent tablet and taken the test, but failed to have her name reach even the second row. Dorothea nodded. Yes, I didn't sense the mark on her body either. However, the physical body isn't hers to begin with, the person inside simply took over it. Dorothea wavered in her belief after everyone offered their opinion in denial. Even though all facts supported her guess, she now felt that the absence of the mark was suspicious. Without it, the woman in front of her couldn't possibly hold the title of the golden celestial position. We can easily verify this. We just need to find the real body of the soul inside her and take a look. It's an easy job. The tall and sturdy man laughed. It will not be easy to pose as a celestial position warrior. Zen still hadn't said a single word. It was unrealistic for him to fight against the 7 powerful warriors of the Spirit Supreme Realm by himself, not to mention that he was now in the physical body of Brianna. Even if Brianna's soul hadn't been sealed, and she could use all her strength, she still wouldn't be able to fight against the 7 powerful masters in front of them. A master at the Spirit Supreme Realm could pulverize anything in this great world. At this point, Zen understood that if he wanted to safely take this ancestral dragon away, he had to prove himself worthy. The truth was, he hadn't lied. Zen said, yes, my physical body is outside of the heavenly stellar sacred place. If you don't believe me, you can come with me and fetch my body. Max pondered for a moment and turned to look at the sealed evil dragon. After thinking for a while, he then said, the evil dragon has already sealed itself, I think we will need to get someone else to remove the seal. We can go with you. The burly man coldly smiled. It takes only a minute to verify whether you lied or not. If you are lying and wasting my time, things will not end well. Zen nodded his head calmly. He then looked at the Soul Sea Realm Masters and said, please bring them together. The group of Soul Sea Realm Masters of the 4 divine kingdoms looked like giant wooden logs, standing motionlessly on the side, listening to the conversation between Zen and these strange warriors. They didn't understand about the celestial position or anything related to it. They vaguely knew that Zen was trying to prove something to them. They wouldn't attack Zen directly as they somewhat believed his words, which gave them a chance of survival. Even if this group of Soul Sea Realm Masters hadn't taken over the corpses, they still wouldn't be able to fight against the 7 Masters of the Spirit Supreme Realm when they were in their best condition. Now that Zen asked them to bring them together, these martial artists of the 4 divine kingdoms suddenly felt a glimmer of hope rising within their hearts. Unexpectedly, the burly man indifferently swept his eyes over these warriors and said, they are just a group of little mice. Just kill them, it's too troublesome to bring them together. Hearing this, all of the martial artists from the 4 divine kingdoms present felt their hearts sink. To the Spirit Supreme Realm Masters, their lives meant nothing. Yes, Tiernan is right. It's too troublesome to bring them together. Just kill them. After he finished speaking, Woody walked towards Turner and the other warriors from the Divine Kingdoms with a black saber in his hand. The group of Soul Sea Realm Masters were unable to move. All Woody needed was to draw one slash of his black saber to exterminate the souls of the martial artists from the 4 Divine Kingdoms. Zen's golden eyes suddenly flashed with a stern expression as he screamed, "Stop!" Woody would not take orders from Zen. He raised his black saber and streams of black energy began to spread along the blade just as he was about to strike it. The martial artists of the 4 Divine Kingdoms could not believe what was going on. They never thought that they would die like this. But they couldn't resist. They couldn't accept being killed so easily. Even though they felt desperate, they had no control over the corpses they occupied. Other than showing resentment and hatred in their eyes, they were not even able to say a single word. At this moment, Zen said coldly, "What if I prove that I do possess the title of the Golden Celestial Position in the end?" Woody lowered his black saber and turned to face Zen, who felt confident in himself. With a smirk Woody said, "Oh. It sounds like you are really sure that you have obtained the title of the Golden Celestial Position." "Yes," Zen said, staring at Woody, his eyes as calm as water. "What if I find out that you are lying?" Woody asked with a smile. "In this great world, no one can act against you. I'll be at your disposal if I fail to make you believe me. And the other warriors too, you can do whatever you want to us then," Zen said. At this moment, Dorothea frowned and said, "Woody, stop. We can still kill them if what he is saying is a lie." At this moment, the black saber in Woody's hand suddenly struck out. But instead of landing on the mighty warriors of the Soul Sea realm, when it was just about to hit them, Woody slightly tilted the saber to one side. A wave of thick blade energy suddenly burst out and extended several hundred feet long. The blade energy entered the ground and shot towards the distance. Whoosh! From the sky above the heavenly stellar sacred place, a thin line extending from the center of the heavenly stellar sacred place could be seen all the way to the edge of the land. "All right, you decide," Woody smiled. To him, it didn't matter whether these rats died or not. The flower in Dorothea's right eye gently turned and removed the confinement on War King Wind and the rest of the warriors. All the corpses were free from the spell. Even so, none of the Soul Sea Realm Masters chose to run away. The corpses they occupied could not use the life vitality. They couldn't even fly or run fast enough. They simply had no power to resist the 7 powerful masters at the Spirit Supreme Realm. If they tried to escape, they would be killed. "Let's go now. Your physical body shouldn't be too far away from the heavenly stellar sacred place, right?" Delroy said indifferently. "How far can it be? This great world isn't even that big," the burly man sneered. Zen didn't reply to the provocations. He turned to War King Wind and the others and said, "Everyone, let's go together." The martial artists of the 4 Divine Kingdoms silently nodded and followed Zen. As for the 7 powerful masters of the Spirit Supreme Realm, they followed right behind everyone else. It took them about 5 minutes to leave the heavenly stellar sacred place. After the transmission array was recovered, the group once again entered the Feather Holy Sea. They would travel along the Road of Saints in the Feather Holy Sea and return to where they set off. When they reached the Road of Saints, all the mighty warriors of the Soul Sea realm took out their huge shields. They planned to use them to block the blue arrows. Delroy smiled and said, "No need to use these." Then, he gently waved his hand. His life vitality flashed and an enchanted barrier appeared, enveloping everyone within. Chapter 903. Return to their own bodies. Although the blue arrows were supposed to be extremely strong, they could not pierce through Delroy's enchanted barrier. Under its protection, everyone easily passed through the Road of Saints even under the constant barrage of arrows and entered the Divine Emperor's secret land. So that's it. The Heavenly Stellar Secret Land is connected to a huge cemetery. No wonder you all took over corpses to pass through. These corpses must have come from the cemetery, if I am not mistaken. Max asked. Although as members of the Celestial Position race, they all looked down on the strength of the warriors from the lower world, the 7 people of the company simply had to admire the way they had figured out to avoid being affected by the blood sacrifice. That's correct. Zen nodded slightly. Then where are your actual bodies? Max's curiosity was aroused. They are on the other side of the Divine Emperor Island, Zen replied. Normally, when they were returning, the warriors of the 4 Divine Kingdoms would place the corpses back in their coffins as they passed through the cemetery. That was what they had been doing every time they had come here. After all, there were very few corpses in the cemetery which had been preserved properly. In fact, the corpses of Soul Sea Realm warriors in prime condition were extremely difficult to get, and every time they used corpses, some wear and tear showed up. If these corpses were casually thrown away every time they used them, it was likely that there would not be enough corpses for them to use next time. This time, however, these Soul Sea Realm Masters didn't place the corpses back in their coffins. They controlled the corpses and passed through the cemetery, heading towards the coast of the Divine Emperor Island. Several Soul Sea Realm Masters were guarding the coast of the Divine Emperor Island. After all, so many people had gone inside, and if their bodies were destroyed while they were in soul forms, things were going to be extremely troublesome. They would be left with no physical existence at all. Derek, Marine, and the others had not entered the Heavenly Stellar's secret land and were also present there. Numerous spirit shrines were lined up on the shore, one after the other, and the bodies of the Soul Sea Realm Masters who had entered the secret land were sitting on the ground in a meditative posture. "They're back, they're back," shouted a mighty warrior at the Soul Sea Realm who was keeping an eye out while the others guarded the place. Marine's and Derek's eyes lit up. But then they noticed the corpses and their eyes revealed a strange expression. "What's going on? Why didn't they drop the corpses in the cemetery?" Marine asked in astonishment. Derek's gaze was fixed upon a young lady in the front of the group. She seemed to be carrying something. In her arms was a furry little thing. Although it looked very strange and didn't look like any animal, the aura that leaked out from it was very specific. Derek was completely certain that it was a dragon. The ancestral dragon. They got it. They've got the ancestral dragon. Derek's face lit up with joy. He was about to fly towards the arriving company, but at this moment, he suddenly felt several powerful pressuring auras stopping him in his path. A warrior mighty enough to make Derek feel such kind of pressure did not exist in this world. Even Zen himself wasn't able to put so much pressure on him. After all, even though the former had shown great abilities, his cultivation was still only at the life and death realm. As for his strength, aside from the fact that he had fused with the world's will, he was probably no different from an ordinary Soul Sea Realm Master. 7 people, all of them are at the Spirit Supreme Realm, Derek announced with a serious expression as he coldly stared at the 7 celestial position warriors who accompanied the company. After the long trek they had just endured, War King Wind and the others finally returned to the Divine Emperor Island, and their expressions showed relaxation. None of them was too willing to let their souls stay in other people's corpses. That was not a good feeling. However, this clumsy method was the only way for them to avoid the power of the blood sacrifice. "Everyone, let's go back to our bodies." War King Wind and the others had just escaped their deaths. They were tired and could not be the least bit bothered about explaining anything to anyone for the moment. One by one, they withdrew their souls from the corpses and flew into their own bodies. After their souls left those corpses, the corpses all fell down to the ground one by one with a thump. The warriors rushed towards their own bodies, unconcerned about the corpses that were falling down with thumps. As for Zen, he wouldn't and couldn't treat Brianna's body in such a manner. She was not dead. If he treated her like that, she would probably go berserk in rage. Thus, he found an open space to sit down in before leaving her body and flying back to his own. After coming into his own, he slowly opened his eyes. At that moment, he saw the newly born ancestral dragon running towards him. Zen's face revealed a puzzled expression. The first person the ancestral dragon had seen when it had hatched was Brianna. Logically speaking, it should have considered Brianna as its mother. Why was it pouncing towards him? The moment his question appeared, the Cyan dragon told him in his mind, the ancestral dragons treat the first person it sees as its mother, but this is not done depending on one's looks. It detects souls. The ancestral dragon recognizes your soul as its mother. Thank you, Zen, you've managed to do it. Previously, when Zen's soul had left his body, it had distanced itself from the Cyan dragon. Although there was still a thread of connection between the two, the Cyan dragon was unable to observe Zen's surroundings. This meant that communication was impossible and fruitless. Now that Zen had returned to his body, the Cyan dragon had also appeared. He was naturally happy to see Zen bring the ancestral dragon back with him. "What? No, this one is a man." Dorothea couldn't help but exclaim in disappointment when she saw that the soul which emerged from Brianna's body flew straight into the body of a handsome man. Max, who was standing at her side, stared at Zen and nodded slightly. "He does have the mark of the celestial position on him. This guy really has been to the Tower of Crystal. Hang on, now, even if he has a mark, it doesn't mean that he has obtained a title. Once his talent reached the second row of the talent tablet, there would be a mark on his body, regardless of whether or not he won a title." Delroy stated, unconvinced. Max nodded and replied, "It doesn't matter anyway. We can continue to verify his words. In any case, he's been to the tower and we need to find it." Man, that is a man, Dorothea murmured, still very conflicted. As for whether or not Zen was recognized as a member of their own by the celestial position race, she did not care. It was a man. The newly born ancestral dragon had no sense of estrangement from Zen as it threw itself into his embrace, constantly licking him with affection. At that moment, Derek walked towards Zen with a smile on his face and said, "Thad, thank you for bringing the ancestral dragon out of the heavenly stellar secret land." As he held the ancestral dragon in his arms, Zen looked at Derek coldly. He then asked in an icy tone, "Why are you thanking me?" Hearing Zen's words, Derek frowned and replied, "We've been trying to get the ancestral dragon's egg for so many years, yet we failed to do so. Now that you've helped us obtain the dragon itself, I naturally have to thank you." "Ha ha, you don't need to thank him, because the ancestral dragon doesn't belong to you." Woody stepped forward with a sarcastic laugh and raised the black saber in his hand, slowly walking over towards Derek. Both of them were at the Spirit Supreme realm, and they had discovered that fact instantly. However, the 7 celestial position warriors did not take Derek seriously as he was alone. Derek knew that he was too weak against 7 people. Furthermore, the ancestral dragon was in Zen's hands, so he did not care about the 7 warriors. He tried to flatter Zen. Derek's face immediately darkened at Woody's words. "Who do you think you are? I work for the Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment." Derek knew that he probably wasn't a match for these 7 people. Their aura was astonishing. Fortunately, his backing was well known throughout the whole universe. Facing these experts of the same cultivation level as him, Derek could only bring out his backing. However, just as he was proudly announcing it, the burly man in front of him laughed and said, "Ha ha. How funny. Are you trying to scare us by mentioning a Supreme Lord? You can use that move to deceive the warriors of the lower world. But we are from the upper world. Your trick doesn't work on us." Deceive them. Derek's eyes narrowed. At that moment, Max cut in, "The Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment is the weakest of the 3 Supreme Lords. But I have to admit that a Supreme Lord is not something we can comment about or take lightly." "It's good that you know that," Derek replied proudly. It was obvious that the man standing in front of him and wearing a silver mask was the most powerful among them all. He might be able to fight the other 6 one-on-one, but he had no confidence in facing this foe. Therefore, Derek restrained himself when talking to him. "But even though you work for the Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment, the ancestral dragon belongs to our celestial position race. Other races have no possibility of getting their hands on it," Max continued in a cold tone. Celestial position race. Derek's face twitched when he heard Max's words. Chapter 904, Condition. A range of emotions, complicatedly intertwined with each other, flitted across Derek's face as he learned that these 7 were from the celestial position race. The celestial position race did not have a good reputation in the upper world. It had a mixed background and a small population, but almost all of its members were elites. But the biggest problem was that they were a bunch of lunatics. Derek had originally hoped to scare these people by revealing the force that backed him. Although the force of the Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment was the weakest of the 3 great human powers, it still occupied 2,000 supreme worlds. It wasn't inferior to any race. If he had known that these people belonged to the celestial position race, Derek wouldn't have even bothered to talk. The problem, however, was that he had to get the ancestral dragon. The Soul Sea Realm Masters of the 4 Divine Kingdoms stood aside and did not say anything. After all, the ancestral dragon would not fall into their hands, no matter what happened. If Derek was powerful, he could just snatch it from their hands. Derek rolled his eyes before saying, "So you all are from the celestial position race. But I've been trying to get the ancestral dragon for..." Max interrupted Derek impatiently, "No matter how much effort you've put in, hoping for this bunch of natives to enter the heavenly stellar secret land to obtain the ancestral dragon's egg was nothing more than a dream. We were the ones who hatched the ancestral dragon and took it out." Woody and the burly man were fiddling with the weapons in their hands, staring at Derek and grinning from time to time. It looked like they were quite eager to fight him. Derek said, "Even though you are from the celestial position race, you can't be so unreasonable." Woody and the burly man were charging at him even before he could finish talking, trying to attack him without warning. The Spirit Supreme Realm warriors had a speed that was absolutely terrifying. The 2 men were aggressive as they attacked Derek, the crowd watching closely. Swoosh. But Derek was fast. As the 2 men moved forward, he retreated, putting thousands of feet between them, shouting, "Stop. We can talk about it." The small shield in his hand transformed into a ray of multicolored light, blocking any attack from the front. The 2 men cursed in unison, moving back to Max's side. The Soul Sea Realm masters of the 4 divine kingdoms sighed. These guys were truly tyrannical, not thinking a single jot about Derek. But Derek was a clever man. It looked like he could only look for help through the reverse spirit channel. He looked at Zen, who was holding the ancestral dragon in his arms, and thought, if the celestial position warriors were not lying and they did indeed hatch the ancestral dragon, then why is the ancestral dragon following Thad? Max didn't care about what was on Derek's mind. Their goal was simple, to verify if Zen really had obtained a title from the Tower of Crystal. And as for the ancestral dragon that was following Zen, they wouldn't take it back for now. Since you really possess the mark of our race, the next step is to find the Tower of Crystal, Max said as he walked towards Zen. His tone became much gentler because he could feel the mark of his own race on Zen's body. And right now, he could truly see Zen as one of his own. Zen nodded. He would never get involved in the dispute between Derek and the celestial position race. Of course, I will take you to the Tower of Crystal. Zen's gaze now concentrated on Brianna's body, and at the same time, he asked the Cyan Dragon, can we do something to help Brianna? She is affected by the soul-sealing spell. Although her body is alive, it's like she is dead. Only if someone can break the soul-sealing spell will she be able to recover. But the soul-sealing spell is a secret technique of the soul race, and the creatures mastering it are too few, the Cyan Dragon answered and sighed. The 9 genuine dragons shared a deep bond with Brianna, which was why, naturally, the Cyan Dragon was very concerned about her. Now that Zen had brought Brianna out, the Cyan Dragon naturally hoped to help her. Zen saw Dorothea walking towards Brianna, disappointment etched on her face. Is this just an empty shell? A soulless body? She reached out to touch Brianna's face, ignoring Zen's presence. Zen was rendered speechless at the scene playing out before him. Dorothea was indeed strange. He knew that Brianna probably started getting angry within her inner world. Sure enough, Brianna's consciousness suddenly spread out. How dare you say I'm a soulless body? Huh, another soul in the body. Dorothea looked pleasantly surprised. Zen walked up to Dorothea and said, her soul has been sealed within the inner world. Sealed in the inner world? Dorothea frowned, but then her eyes lit up and she asked, the soul-sealing spell. Although it was a secret technique of the soul race, the soul-sealing spell was very famous. And Dorothea was already proficient in soul cultivation methods. She guessed the reason behind Brianna's soul being sealed within the inner world the moment she heard of it. Zen nodded, a plan forming in his mind. The Cyan Dragon couldn't break the soul-sealing spell. But could Dorothea do it? Weren't there a lot of capable people in the celestial position race? Hey, can you help her break the spell? Zen asked. Dorothea became serious. Only those who knew about the soul-sealing spell would understand how difficult it was to break it. She thought for a moment and then seemed to make up her mind before saying, I can break it, but... She can do it. Zen was overjoyed, and quickly asked, but what? But there is a condition. She answered. What condition? Brianna spoke first this time, before Zen could even open his mouth to speak. For the last 100,000 years, because of the soul-sealing spell, she had obtained longevity that far surpassed an ordinary warrior's. Her body had even stopped aging, and the 5 aging processes had yet to descend. In truth, the soul-sealing spell was also one of the ways that warriors from the upper world used to extend their lifespans. The problem was that over the past few years, she had been only able to build her own world within her inner body slowly. She felt rather lonely. Brianna hoped, even in her dreams, that someone would be able to break the soul-sealing spell. Now that Dorothea was saying that she could help her solve this problem, Brianna was extremely excited, no matter how much she hated Dorothea. Dorothea giggled, temporarily forgetting about Zen and returning to be her cheerful self. She smiled and said, the condition is that you have to marry me. What do you think? Ahem. Zen began coughing violently. The celestial position race warriors shook their heads in exasperation. They knew about Dorothea's personality and her sexual orientation very well. Brianna was silent, not knowing what to say at that moment. She was not like Dorothea. She was not gay, and it was impossible for her to fall in love with a woman, but the soul-sealing spell was much more tortuous when compared to the prospect of being married to her. At Brianna's silence, Dorothea blinked and said, you also know that breaking the soul-sealing spell is going to be quite troublesome. I have to ask someone to help me, and I will have to pay a heavy price. This condition isn't too much, is it? Zen shook his head, but didn't say anything. He didn't have anything to do with the relationship between these two women. He had left the heavenly stellar secret land. He had also obtained the ancestral dragon and the life crystals to save Letitia. He would first return to the central region to wake Letitia up, and then bring this bunch of people to the sea god continent to find the Tower of Crystal. He didn't know what Brianna and Dorothea were talking about, but in the end, Dorothea flashed a very satisfied smile. It looked like the two of them had reached an agreement. Max said to Zen, "We better not stay here any longer. Since you know where the Tower of Crystal is, take us there immediately." Chapter 905, A Bet. The seven of them could do nothing about the sealed evil dragon. They could only send for more capable and powerful celestial position warriors from the upper world. In comparison, the Tower of Crystal was even more important. Although Max and his men didn't believe that Zen had gained the title of the Golden Celestial Position, they really wanted to see how Zen had obtained recognition from the talent tablet. Was his talent listed on the second row or the first row of the talent tablet? Or had he obtained a bronze title? All these doubts needed to be clarified. But Zen said rather nonchalantly, "I will take you to the Tower of Crystal, but before that, I still have something important to do." Zen had planned that after he obtained the life crystals, he would return to the central region as soon as possible. But his plan had been delayed since he had promised the Cyan Dragon that he would enter the heavenly stellar secret land to take out the ancestral dragon egg. He had obtained the ancestral dragon, but it was hard to say where it would belong in the end. Even if this ancestral dragon had an imprinting of him on it, the celestial position would never give it up. Moreover, Derek was also here, watching him covetously, and Zen was sure that he would not give up easily. But Zen was not worried. Neither Derek nor the warriors of the celestial position had shown absolute hostility towards him. Furthermore, he had obtained the title of the Golden Celestial Position in the Tower of Crystal, so he only needed to cooperate with them. But before that, he had to return to the central region to save Letitia. "Important thing, is that an excuse for you to back away?" Woody said coldly. Even if Zen possessed the mark of the celestial position, he had only gained recognition. Woody felt that Zen had boasted about his achievements, but didn't dare try to prove it for fear of being caught. Zen looked witheringly at Woody as he replied, "I am not from the Divine Kingdom continent. I came here only to seek life stones to save someone. If you don't believe me, you can search for the Tower of Crystal in this great world yourself. This great world isn't too big for you, is it?" Although this great world was not that big, it was still difficult to accurately pinpoint the location of the Sea God continent. The four divine kingdoms were relatively close to the central region, but the Sea God continent was too far away. It was not that the several warriors of the celestial position could not find it. But if Zen did not provide the coordinates and direction, it would be impossible for them to find the Tower of Crystal in a short period of time. "Humph, it's so simple, we can directly search your soul. Dorothea is most proficient in this technique," Woody said with a sneer. Zen's face darkened at this, but Dorothea interjected, "He was recognized by our celestial position. If he were to join the celestial position in the future, he would become our compatriot. So watch your tongue, Woody." Woody chuckled and continued, "He's just a martial artist from the lower world who was fortunate enough to have his name listed on the talent tablet. At most, he would only be able to leave his name on the second row. And compatriot, is this fellow qualified to be our compatriot?" Dorothea shook her head. Sometimes, Woody didn't think before speaking. But Dorothea still had a glimmer of hope because Zen really didn't seem like he was lying. So Dorothea said, "What if what he said is true? What if he really does have the Golden Celestial Position title?" If they could confirm that Zen's talent had really been honored with the title of the Golden Celestial Position, it would be a news to celebrate for the entire celestial position. "Ha ha," Woody laughed loudly. "Dorothea, you have always been shrewd and astute. But right now, I can't believe that you are actually convinced by this brat's words." Delroy, Tiernan, and the others also started laughing. They might have believed it if Zen had claimed to have obtained the silver or bronze title. But it all sounded too strange when he claimed to have received the golden title. They would probably not believe it even if they saw it with their own eyes. "What will you do if it is true?" Dorothea stared at Woody and asked seriously. She didn't know why, but this time, she chose to believe Zen. Perhaps it was her sixth sense that was telling her that Zen wasn't lying. With a swish, Woody produced his black saber, maneuvered it effortlessly in a series of arcs and placed it before him. He said flatly, "If it's true, I will swallow the black nether saber in one gulp." "Really?" Dorothea blinked and then laughed. Woody nodded. He was serious this time. "Yes, I mean it." Zen gasped as he watched them make the bet. The black nether saber, at least a supreme divine weapon, was unusually sharp, and this guy was saying he would swallow it if he lost. Zen couldn't wait to see if he could do it or not. "You two stop messing around." Max's voice sounded. He finally turned to Zen and said, "Since you said you wanted to go back to save someone, we shall leave immediately. We can take you there, and it won't take much time." Zen's spirits lifted at this. Right this moment, a terrifying storm was brewing in the chaotic ocean of stars. It would be difficult to cross the ocean, even for Soul Sea Realm Masters. Even if Zen had entered the life and death realm, he would probably have died if he forced his way through. The abilities of this group of Spirit Supreme Realm Masters were unimaginably powerful. And if they could help bring him back to the central region, he would be grateful to them. "Okay, we shall set off immediately," Max said, waving his hand. A piece of blood-red rune appeared in his hand which he casually tossed away. The rune formed a huge red cross, which then firmly engraved itself on the ground. "What's that?" a few martial artists from the 4 divine kingdoms whispered. "It's just a locating rune used by the celestial position. Using special methods, they can return here at any time," Derek said sullenly. From the conversation between Zen and the warriors of the celestial position, it seemed that Zen had taken a test in a tower belonged to the celestial position. And this piece of information had left him sour. The celestial position didn't have a good reputation in the universe, but they were very famous. Derek knew about the 3 towers of the celestial position that were used for warriors to practice, and it was said that they had lost one. But he had never heard of that ever having been tested in the tower. Previously, as Zen was in the process of undergoing his tribulation, Derek knew that this kid had activated the Mahayana lotus flower. Derek had been overjoyed at the time. To him, the ancestral dragon egg was very important, and Zen, even more so. He had been thrilled to see Zen appear on the Divine Emperor Island with an ancestral dragon in his arms. But he had not expected the celestial position race to interfere. But gauging from their conversation, it looked like Zen had already gone through the test in a tower and had a celestial position mark on him. Derek's heart was filled with despair, his face darkening. After setting up the locating rune, Max once again raised his cane and gently waved it in the air before bringing it down in a sharp slash. An irregular space crack appeared out of thin air. "Delroy, open it," Max ordered. Delroy nodded and walked towards the space crack that was over 100 feet high. He stretched his hand and sent an enchanted barrier shooting out of it. Shortly after, the enchanted barrier started to rapidly expand. Cracking sounds rent the air before the enchanted barrier succeeded in opening the space crack. A small space hole had appeared. Hank took out the 8-diagram wheel that was several dozen feet wide. It grew as the wind came at it, and it was pretty obvious that this was their treasure to fly. Woody and the rest of the group followed Max and jumped onto the 8-diagram wheel. Dorothea then looked at Zen and said, "All right, let's go." Zen nodded. His eyes turned towards the group containing Fiona and Randy, and looked at them wistfully yet fondly. Although he hadn't been in the Divine Kingdom continent for very long, he had made many friends. A variety of thoughts flitted through the minds of the group Zen was looking at. Zen had saved them several times, but if it weren't for Zen, they wouldn't have been able to return from the heavenly stellar secret land. Even their fathers and all the other Soul Sea Realm Masters of the 4 divine kingdoms wouldn't have survived without Zen's help. They were grateful to Zen, but now, Randy and the others were reluctant to part with him. They couldn't talk to Zen, given the current situation. Even the 4 rulers chose to remain silent in the presence of this group of Spirit Supreme Realm warriors. As their gazes met, Zen smiled and said, "I will come back." He had barely finished talking when Fiona suddenly turned into a fiery red shadow and ran towards Zen. Chapter 906, Shadow Creature. Seeing his daughter leave in a rush, War King Wind was rather shocked, and it showed on his face. Even as a king of the Divine Kingdom continent and a top-notch warrior in the lower world, he was nothing in front of the Spirit Supreme Realm Masters. These 7 masters had been acting a little crazily from start to end. He was afraid that his daughter's behavior might irritate them somehow. While War King Wind wanted to stop her, his daughter shot out like an arrow. He couldn't stop her in time. Caring about Fiona the most, War King Wind understood her personality rather well. He had already figured out long ago that his daughter took a fancy to Zen. She had always been so gentle and restrained. War King Wind hadn't exactly expected her to be so impulsive when it came to such matters. Rushing out, Fiona stepped in front of Zen and stared at him with her most charming eyes. There was no smile on her face and her expression turned utterly serious. "Will you really come back?" Fiona bit her lips and softly asked. Seeing her expression, Zen faintly smiled and nodded cautiously, "Of course I'll be back." Though she seemed ready to speak, it was an impulse, just now. At this moment, she realized that everyone was looking at her. It made her blush. But this hesitation could only afford to last a few seconds. Sometimes, it was difficult for a young girl to do certain things. But no matter what, she immediately made up her mind. She took the necklace from her neck, walked up to Zen and put the necklace on him. While it wasn't a precious thing, it was still her token. "I'll wait for your return," Fiona said. She had to put on the best forced smile she could before turning around and leaving. Wearing the necklace, Zen watched Fiona's back with a complicated expression. Silently, he nodded and then got on the 8-diagram wheel. As for Woody and the big man, they both had faint smiles on their faces, both of which Zen chose to ignore. In addition to Zen and the other 7 members of the celestial position, Brianna was brought into the wheel. As the 8-diagram wheel slowly rotated, the warriors inside flew into the space hole. Not long after, the 8-diagram wheel disappeared from the members of the Divine Kingdoms. After Delroy removed the enchanted barrier of the space crack, it diminished rapidly. The crack was considered as something like the wound of the Great World. Originally, the world had the ability to self-heal. Such a wound was a minor thing. But the warriors who mastered the space law could see the shadow, the weakest part of the space. In the eyes of the 4 divine kingdoms, warriors, the celestial position members were like the plague. They brought upon fear and doom. As soon as they disappeared, many Soul Sea Realm masters felt the burden lift off their shoulders as relief replaced their anxiety. Only Derek still pulled a long face. "Master Derek," Marine called him. "Do you still want to report on Zen's information?" "Humph, of course. This news must be reported. Today, the reverse spirit channel will be opened. How could the celestial position race meddle in our matters?" At this point, Derek was shouting in fury. In his eyes, he had to search for either Zen or the ancestral dragon himself. If the celestial position wanted to have a hand in it, they had to first prove if they had the ability to do so. The several rulers of the 4 divine kingdoms merely ignored Derek's anger. It was all thanks to Zen that they were even alive. After getting everything ready, they set on their own journey as well, leaving the Feather Holy Sea. They had to leave this place before the blood sacrifice power fully recovered. In the darkness, the 8-diagram wheel was moving at rapid speed. There was no light in the space crack, behind it was only the void. After Zen determined the proper direction, Hank steered the 8-diagram wheel, moving forward at an increasing speed. This time, they passed through the chaotic ocean of stars and traveled to the backside of the world, avoiding the threat of the deadly storm. In the past, Zen and Logan fought in the void, but only for a short period. This time, it was a far longer journey in the void. Zen's curiosity was piqued in the pitch-black darkness. It was as though nothing existed around him. Sitting on the 8-diagram wheel, he glanced around in thought and then asked, "Does nothing exist in the void?" The 7 members of the celestial race sat cross-legged on the 8-diagram wheel, their heads held high. Upon hearing Zen's question, Woody responded in a voice dripping with sarcasm, "Of course, it's called the void because nothing exists in here." What a foolish question. Zen only rolled his eyes at the retort. Apart from Max and Dorothea, none of the rest seemed friendly. Many were very arrogant and some often liked to offer unkind jabs just as Woody did. With that, Zen decided to stop talking and sat cross-legged to meditate, closing his eyes off to the world. But at this moment, Zen felt a sudden wave of cold breath rush past him. The other 7 opened their eyes as well at the sensation. Suddenly, Max stood up with a deep frown on his face. Everyone else seemed to have felt the coldness. "What's that?" Dorothea asked with her brows furrowed. In his worry, Max's face turned grim. "We're unlucky this time around. It seems that we will encounter the shadow creature." "What on earth is a shadow creature?" Woody asked, his voice a bit raised from frustration. "The shadow creature is the living being on the backside of the world," Delroy responded. "I should also correct you from earlier, something indeed exists in the void. Although there aren't many shadow creatures in here, all of them are very strong. We'll be in great trouble if we ever have to face them." "Why is there such a thing?" At this point, Woody began feeling rather embarrassed. When the shadow creature appeared right after he retorted Zen, it put him in an awkward situation. But Zen merely rolled his eyes, finding the whole thing very trivial. He had never liked arguing with idiots like Woody. Huff, huff, huff. In the darkness, not even the Spirit Supreme Realm Masters could see from a long distance. Still in the flying 8-diagram wheel, they surely had no idea what happened. The sound alarmed everyone, turning the atmosphere anxious. Zen's eyes flashed and a wisp of jade-green luster shone in his eyes. After he activated his magic vision ability, the darkness in the void slowly disappeared. It was instead replaced by a green, healthy world. After surveying the area for a moment, his gaze fell on something behind him. His eyes widened in shock as he shouted, "What is that?" A giant head, tens of thousands of feet away from the 8-diagram wheel, rapidly followed behind them. The head looked like that of a human being, but it was as large as a mountain. Instead of hair on its head, there sat numerous thick pythons. Unlike the others, Zen could make use of his magic vision to observe the giant head from a distance. "What do you see?" Max asked nervously. It was no easy task for them to deal with the shadow creature, after all. And while Max was curious about how Zen saw the creature, he didn't dare question him. Zen could see the head approaching them. A huge head. A head. After a moment of pondering, the fear sank in as Max's eyes widened. This is terrible. How could such a thing exist in the shadow of the great world? Delroy looked devastated as he spoke in a trembling voice, "Oh no, leave this void right now." Leave the void, but the outside area is the sky above the chaotic ocean of stars. This star storm is also. Zen began uttering. But Max merely snorted at his reaction. Compared to that creature, the star storm is nothing at all. Delroy, get ready. With that, Max swung his cane in front of him once again. It was obvious that this time, Max had made complete use of his power, charged through his cane. Crack! With such great power, the cracking sounds of the space began blending. It was extremely ear-piercing, as if tens of thousands of people were scraping their nails against a screeching surface. Chapter 907, Black Wind Blades. The space crack in front of them was quickly ripped open by Max's crutch. Seeing that, Delroy clapped his hands and swiftly opened his palms. In an instant, an enchanted barrier spread open in the crack. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The ominous whoosh of the wind reminded them of their limited time as the thing behind them got closer and closer. Even without his magical vision, Zen was still able to make out the gigantic outline of a head that had opened its huge mouth, intending to swallow the 8-diagram wheel in one gulp. The 8-diagram wheel was around 50 feet wide, but it looked like a tiny mosquito compared to that huge, cavernous mouth. If one turned around and squinted, he or she would be able to make out a few shadows that resided within that mouth. However, it was too dim around that they couldn't distinguish the shape of these shadows. The horrible outlines of these mysterious beings caused a shiver to run up everyone's spine. The shadow creature advanced at a frighteningly fast rate, quickly closing the distance with the warriors. Failure to go through the space crack and get out of the void in time would mean death by being swallowed into its huge, gaping mouth. At that moment, Hank suddenly took out a sharp weapon. Clenching his teeth, he cut his wrist open and slapped on the 8-diagram wheel. Splash! Instead of red, a stream of golden blood burst out and was immediately absorbed by the 8-diagram wheel. Let's go! Whoosh! Hank's blood obviously activated something in the 8-diagram wheel as rays of bright light suddenly burst out and it increased its speed twofold. The light also illuminated the shadows that they had all noticed earlier, and everyone gasped in astonishment at what they saw. Delroy and Max, however, looked more nervous than shocked, seemingly already aware of what they were currently facing. Thankfully, because of its increased speed, the 8-diagram wheel was finally able to enter the space crack. Seeing its prey have escaped, the shadow creature suddenly let out a cold aura that spread and covered the entirety of the 8-diagram wheel. This aura contained a variety of negative emotions like the desire for violence, bloodlust, cruelty, and reluctance to admit defeat. Humph, that thing can only survive in the void. Once it steps out, it would be like a fish out of water and will surely not survive. It won't dare come out and chase us, Max huffed with a cold snort just as they rushed out of the void. His words might have been sure, but his face was still as pale as ever. However, just as he finished his words, they heard the sharp whistle of the wind above their heads. What is this? Woody shouted at the sight of sharp wind blades rushing towards them. A couple would have been all right, but there were millions above them. None of these Spirit Supreme Realm warriors from the Celestial Position race ever took anything from the lower world seriously. They never thought there would be something here in this great world that would actually render them speechless. Both cyan and black wind blades rushed after them. The wild, cyan ones contained the power of 4 layers of the wind law, while the black ones contained 5 layers of wind law. Zen had warned them about the dangerous storms in the chaotic ocean of stars before they set out, but nobody took it seriously. None of them were prepared for the strength of the coming storm because they weren't able to fathom just what kind of devastation it could entail. These 7 were powerful masters at the Spirit Supreme Realm who could enter the Feather Holy Sea as they pleased, unlike the other Soul Sea Realm warriors who could only utilize corpses to explore. They had great faith in their strength and capacity to weather any challenges that might arise for them, be it monsters or some kind of dangerous storm. However, the sight of these wind blades above them told them just how wrong they were to have underestimated Zen's warning. Clang, 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 7 to 8 pitch-black wind blades charged at them all at once. Tiernan acted quickly, twisting his fiery red sickle and slicing the blades in pieces before they could do any damage. However, his attack just then had already used 80% of his strength. The huge counterforce shook the entire 8-diagram wheel violently. A few wind blades were nothing, but millions of them, well, it was another matter entirely. Despite slicing a couple of blades, more than 10,000 were already on their way to them, sending everyone to a mild panic. Delroy, what are you doing? Open the enchanted barrier, Woody roared. Delroy sent him a scathing glare before clapping his hands once again. An enchanted barrier instantly wrapped everyone inside, but there was a catch. My enchanted barrier can't block the 5th layer wind law. A violent crashing sound came from above them just as he finished speaking. The onslaught of wind blades was too much and Delroy's enchanted barrier shattered under the powerful pressure. The law of causality might be considered as a kind of superior law, however it was still divided into levels. Delroy's enchanted barrier contained the law of causality, but he had only comprehended a low level which made it susceptible to caving in under the attack of a higher level original law. Besides, there were millions of wind blades. Millions. I shouldn't have counted on you, Woody shrieked, waving the black nether saber in his hand desperately. A black aura burst out from the saber and lots of black energy shot out from it. Puff puff puff. Dull bursts of sound could be heard as the blades in the air and the energy from Woody met and clashed in the middle. Woody's black blade energy was able to shatter a few cyan wind blades but was instantly devoured by the black wind blades. Whoosh! The black wind blades continued their descent and rushed towards Zen at an extremely fast rate. The sight immediately put him on edge and he put his guard up immediately. Zen knew he could not count on any of these Spirit Supreme Realm Masters to help him. They were all too busy trying to fight off the legions of wind blades that threatened to end them all. Be careful, Dorothea shouted, noticing he was in trouble. She'd help, but she was currently preoccupied with dodging the other wind blades. The black wind blades were almost within reach. Noticing this, Zen quickly clenched his fists and gathered the power of his dragon scales, aiming a punch towards the oncoming attack. You idiot, do you want to cut your own hand off? Woody screamed when he saw what Zen was about to do. As Spirit Supreme Realm Masters, they would never dare face these blades head-on. The power of 5 layers of wind law was no joke. Even if it was the divine weapon, the black nether saber that hit the wind blades, they would notch the saber. How could Zen just punch them away with his fist? Bang 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 bang. Of course, Zen simply ignored Woody. He waved his fist and formed shadows that began to attack the black wind blades headed for him. To everyone's surprise and wonder, the black wind blades immediately shattered to pieces. Meanwhile, Zen was in perfectly one piece, unharmed and unbothered. Woody couldn't help but stare at him with his mouth gaping open. He was so shocked that he even forgot where he was and that there were millions of wind blades headed his way. He could only dumbly stare at Zen and wonder just how he did the stunt just now. What was this fellow's body made of? A divine weapon, a supreme divine weapon, or something that was even more powerful than a supreme divine weapon? It wasn't just Woody. Dorothea, Delroy, Max, Hank, and everyone else had seen Zen's actions, and the surprise on their faces was evident. It was true that Zen had received recognition from the celestial position race and was regarded with a high standard. However, he was still a martial artist from the lower world and would have to prove himself deserving of the title he had claimed. They never did bother to find out Zen's actual strength. What was a mere first-level life and death realm warrior to a group of powerful Spirit Supreme Realm Masters after all? They didn't even take Derek, a Spirit Supreme Realm Master, seriously, so what more Zen? Their race was made up of elites and the gap between a human and a celestial position member both at the Spirit Supreme Realm was huge. But here was Zen, breaking all these preconceived notions they had for him. Just how did he shatter those frighteningly powerful wind blades that contained 5 layers of the power of the wind law? Sure, he might have some type of magic strength that helped him destroy the wind blades, but still. Even a Spirit Supreme Realm warrior would have been instantly cut in half if he or she was hit by the wind blades, but Zen was able to come out unscathed. Chapter 908. The 7 Stars Plate. The 7 people from the celestial position race didn't understand how Zen could break the black wind blades. 1,500 miles away, there stood a mountain in the sea. It was estimated that it stood at a height of hundreds of feet above sea level. Zen directed the power to the mountain and 8 explosions burst out in quick succession. The mountain looked colorful. It had remained unharmed over the millions of years it had been in the violent storm of the chaotic ocean of stars, constantly slashed by the black wind blades. This mountain was the magnetic sacred mountain that had been lost to the chaotic ocean of stars. Most part of the mountain was hidden under the sea and only a small part stuck out of the water. Fierce waves swept and crashed against it and the wind blades kept cutting at it, but the mountain stood erect and unshakable. When Zen had fought against the terrible force of the heavenly tribulation, he had shifted all the force to the 5 million mountains in the great world. It caused every mountain, except the ones in the eastern region, to be destroyed. Zen hadn't damaged the great world on purpose and he wasn't willing to do so either. He had felt sorry, guilty even, and thought that maybe he had done so for his own sake. The magnetic sacred mountain was so firm that nothing could harm it. He should have shifted the force to the magnetic sacred mountain. It was a pity that the situation had been urgent at the time, and he hadn't been able to think of it carefully before going ahead with his plan. He had learned a lesson from that incident and he became more cautious from then on, careful not to make the mistake again. A whirring sound announced that the 8-diagram wheel was flying forward. The 7 people of the celestial position race resisted the dense black wind blades with everything they had. Max held onto his crutch and said anxiously, "Delroy, we can't go on like this. Sacrifice something you have. I've already used my 7 stars plate 5 times. I don't want to waste it again," Delroy said reluctantly. Delroy owned a precious treasure called the 7 stars plate. It was a kind of a supreme divine weapon, but it could only be used 7 times. Over the years, Delroy had survived several crises by relying on this 7 stars plate. It could be said that the 7 opportunities of using the plate meant that it could save his life 7 times. Which was why he really hated the idea of wasting one of his valuable opportunities here. The chaotic ocean of stars is vast and I don't know how long it will take for us to cross such a long distance. Do you think we can make it the way we're going? Max asked coldly. Delroy rolled his eyes and retorted, "Why don't you use your holy blood secret skill?" Do you really think so? Max snorted acidly, glaring fiercely at Delroy. At the glare, Delroy thrust his hand into his Sumeru space and reluctantly took out his milky white 7 stars plate. Zen was disappointed at the conversation between these 2 men. They were all in big trouble and they should be united right now. But maybe these men were too strong and didn't deem the storm as a real crisis. If the Soul Sea Realm cultivators from the 4 divine kingdoms had come here instead, the wind blades might have slashed them to rags. When the 7 stars plate worked, Delroy's eyes lit up like the stars. Although it was daytime and there were thick clouds floating in the sky, Zen could see 7 stars shining overhead. Zen's eyes flashed as he saw what was happening. He realized that the principle of the 7 stars plate was similar to the stellar body that the red dragon had taught him. The difference between the 2 skills was that while Zen's stellar body was connected to his body, Delroy's 7 stars plate was connected to the 7 stars in the sky and had a limit on how many times it could be used. Zing, zing, zing. With a zinging sound, a milky white enchanted barrier appeared on the 7 stars plate, which then enlarged quickly to spread all around. It wasn't long before everyone was enveloped in the enchanted barrier. The milky white enchanted barrier would sink when the countless wind blades slammed against it, but wouldn't break. It seemed to be very soft, though it was made of a rather tenacious material. "We are safe now. The 7 stars plate's performance of isolation is strong enough to avoid the attacks of black wind blades," Delroy told the others, but he sounded unhappy. The enchanted barrier had blocked the deadly wind blades, but it looked like he was still not happy about utilizing the 7 stars plate one more time. Everyone, including Dorothea and Woody, breathed a deep sigh of relief. Max shook his head and said, "The storm is abnormal anyway." "The whole great world is essentially abnormal," Delroy muttered unpleasantly. They had studied the information related to the great world before setting out from the celestial position. The ascending path of the great world had been destroyed and the people there couldn't fly to the upper world using normal methods. It was just a minor problem, though, because in the millions of great worlds, it wasn't the only one that had been destroyed. So they didn't pay much attention to the danger they might face. But they had just been chased all the way by the shadow creature in the void. They had managed to escape and had encountered a terrible storm, every single experience completely unexpected. Zen agreed with Max. The chaotic ocean of stars had existed since ancient times. The storm had completely separated the central region from the 4 divine kingdoms. So although the 2 continents weren't that far apart, there had been little contact between them for a number of years. The question now was, how did the storm come into being? Perhaps nobody knew the answer. The wind blades whirred, and the 8-diagram wheel they were on galloped smoothly forward. Max kept going over the possible causes of the storm and kept quickly contradicting his conclusions himself. No matter how it happened, a storm of this intensity is not supposed to occur in the lower world, Delroy said carelessly. Zen shrugged. He thought Delroy to be arrogant to be looking down on the lower world. Delroy frowned at Zen's reaction. He suddenly remembered what Zen had just done to the wind blades. Even more fantastic than the dangerous storm was Zen's ability to withstand the black wind blades with his physical body. Zen, may I ask you a question? How did you break those wind blades? You do know that the black wind blades contain the power of the 5 layers of the wind law, asked Delroy, staring at Zen. Delroy's question reminded the others about what had just happened. Woody and Dorothea had just calmed down and hadn't gotten to think about it. Everyone looked inquiringly at Zen. You broke those wind blades with your fists. How are you not injured? Dorothea asked, coming over to Zen, grabbing his hands, and examining them. Zen didn't know how to answer this question. He just chuckled and said, compared to yours, mine is just an insignificant skill. Dorothea raised an eyebrow. You don't want to tell us? It's really hard to explain, Zen smiled and said. They knew that Zen was acting modest and hiding something. But they couldn't really force him to tell them his secret. After all, everyone had their own secrets to keep. Moreover, Zen was not their enemy and bore no hostility towards them. If it was confirmed that Zen had really attained the title, no matter what the title, they would be comrades in arms. Everyone lapsed into silence as they looked at the dense wind blades raging outside the enchanted barrier. Even the great masters in the Spirit Supreme realm felt small and weak in the face of nature and its omnipotence. Max, what is the creature that followed us in the void? The big head. Zen broke the silence. The storm was severe, but the Spirit Supreme realm masters were powerful enough to handle it. They could block the wind blades using their skills despite how troublesome the blades were. And going by Delroy and Max's conversation, it looked like they still had other skills to manage the storm. But when the big head had chased them in the void, Max's face had paled with fear. What in the lower world could make him so frightened? Zen wondered. Chapter 909, Return to Oracle City. These 7 warriors were all Spirit Supreme Realm Masters and Max was probably the most powerful among them. But even though they were remarkable, they still ran away from the shadow creature. So what was hiding in the dark behind of this world? Even Zen was curious about this. Before Max could reply, Delroy said, that is the God-despised race. The God-despised race, Zen repeated, his eyes flashing. Delroy nodded and said, it is a race that is despised by the gods. Although the shadow creatures are divided into many races, the largest of them is the God-despised race. Seeing that Zen and the others were listening curiously, Max nodded and said, Delroy is right. Even the universe had a backside, but compared to that of the great world, the space of the upper world was much more stable and hence, more difficult to tear apart. At the backside of the whole universe was a large, empty world. Though the shadow creatures were rare, their actual number in the backside of the universe wasn't small. The God-despised race ruled absolutely over the shadow creatures. They couldn't leave the backside of the world, but they still had a great influence on the entire universe. A race despised by the gods. Why do the gods despise them, though? Zen asked. Max laughed, shook his head, and said, I have no idea. Perhaps the world lords and supreme lords know the reason. Zen nodded, but he had an extremely uncomfortable feeling, as if there was something unknown invading his body. A sense of foreboding took over his mind as he continued to ask, then why would the God-despised race enter this great world? Zen was well aware of this sense of crisis. Ever since he had fused with the will of the great world, he had gradually become one with the entire great world. And now that he knew about the existence of such a terrifying thing at the backside of the great world, he naturally felt foreboding creep through him. I have no idea, but I will report this to the Celestial Position race. But whether the Celestial Position race investigates the matter or not is not up to me, Max said, looking straight ahead. The God-despised race was mysterious and strong, so the Spirit Supreme Realm Masters would not be able to interfere with the race's actions or resist them. Max's current task was just to search for the Tower of Crystal. Zen nodded. No matter what these shadow creatures wanted to do, he couldn't interfere with them with his current strength. It was better to rush back first. After the 8-diagram wheel had burned Hank's blood essence, its flying speed had multiplied, surpassing Zen's expectations. When the storm had stopped, Zen had spent several days traversing the entire chaotic ocean of stars, but this time, it had taken them only 4 hours. 4 hours later, the 8-diagram wheel dashed out of the huge storm, confronted by a pitch-black object that seemed to rise slowly out of the horizon. Zen's eyes flashed at the black object. That was a corner of the central region. He became excited as he saw it. He had finally returned after roving around the 4 divine kingdoms for nearly half a year. As the easternmost continent of the central region, the fish dragon sect had remained intact despite quite a few upheavals. And as Zen and the others approached, they could see many warriors of the fish dragon sect cultivating in front of the sect gate. A tiny black dot came into being in the air, flying towards them at the terrifying speed above the sea. But it disappeared in a flash in just a few seconds. "Master, what is that thing?" a young warrior asked. "It is just an illusion. Do you understand? It's your illusion. Focus on practicing," an elder scolded. "Is this really an illusion? I think I see it too." Perhaps even Zen, the top warrior in the central region, cannot fly at such a high speed. Looks like we are all hallucinating at the same time. Ever since Zen had killed Eddie, he had gained considerable prestige in the central region and replaced Eddie as the strongest warrior in the central region. All kinds of stories about Zen were spreading among the warriors. But the central region had fallen into chaos during Zen's absence. The ethereal spirit sect that had been destroyed by the heavenly evil sect had been rebuilt. Although the ethereal spirit sect and the ethereal city had been attacked and damaged, some of the key figures had survived. With the rich resources of the ethereal spirit sect, it could have been rebuilt in a short period of time. But since many of its members had been killed, its recovery had fallen to a snail's pace. It would take hundreds of years to return to being a top sect of the central region. Apart from this, Simon, the Poison King, seemed to be making a move again. He had gathered some members of the heavenly evil sect, and it looked like they were trying to stage a comeback after the attack had failed. When Zen had killed Eddie, Simon had quickly escaped and hidden in the dreamy swampland where he had earlier lived in for hundreds of years. He was probably tired of living there in seclusion. So when he learned news that Zen had gone to the 4 divine kingdoms, he had begun plotting. If only Zen made use of the will of the great world and looked into these matters, he could figure out what was happening. He knew everything about the great world, now that he had fused with the will of the great world. And as long as he concentrated for even a short while, he could get any information he wanted. But Zen had never used this ability a lot. He only ever used it to occasionally check on Letitia. It had taken the 8-diagram wheel only 4 hours to travel across the vast chaotic ocean of stars that could probably accommodate 100 central regions. So once they had entered the central region, it took them only 5 minutes to get to Oracle City. As they arrived, Max looked down on the Oracle City and asked, "Is this it?" Zen nodded. Woody said, "Hurry up and go. We'll wait for you here." Zen turned to them and asked, "Since you've come all the way here, would you like to?" "No, we are not interested in this sort of a place," Delroy remarked arrogantly. Max didn't say anything, and the others sat cross-legged, their eyes closed, as if they were asleep. These guys are really cocky. I was just politely inviting them, Zen thought, rolling his eyes. He then prepared to leave the 8-diagram wheel. But just as he began to leave, he heard Dorothea say, "Zen, I'll accompany you." Woody chuckled and said, "Dorothea, this place is far inferior to even the Divine Kingdom continent. Why do you still want to go?" "It's none of your business," Dorothea said and jumped down with Zen. Dorothea probably thought that Delroy and Woody had been too haughty and gone too far. She said to Zen, "Don't think too much about what they say. They are from the upper world and are born with arrogance." Zen smiled. He hadn't taken this to heart at all. Zen had met a lot of arrogant warriors since he had started cultivating martial arts. He had traveled to many places and noticed that there was no dearth of such people in the Sea County, the Imperial Capital, the Cloud Sect, and the Cloud Hall. He had gotten used to this kind of arrogance. Though the 6 warriors on the 8-diagram wheel were Spirit Supreme Realm Masters, they were all arrogant like other ordinary warriors. 2 figures shot down from the sky and headed directly for the Heavenly Stellar Palace. Through the memories of the Great World, Zen knew that Letitia had been at the Heavenly Stellar Palace for the past half-year. He was in a hurry to meet her and wasn't even bothered to inform the 3 leaders of the World Commercial Alliance. Just as Zen landed in the Heavenly Stellar Palace, hundreds of runes suddenly appeared around it. Zen and Dorothea were almost blinded, as all the runes simultaneously emitted rays of brilliant light. The light flew towards Zen and Dorothea. "Do you have a death wish?" Dorothea did not know what was going on, and became angry as the flower in her right eye started spinning. The power of these rays of light was nothing to Dorothea, but the consequences of attacking her would be severe. She could strike back with a strength that could debilitate anyone. Chapter 910. The Zither Player. Seeing that Dorothea wanted to retaliate, Zen hurriedly waved his hand. "Don't." The strength of the Spirit Supreme Realm martial artist was terrifying. If a Soul Sea Realm martial artist could destroy a mountain range with a wave of his hand, then her attack could probably destroy the entire Oracle City in an instant. Swish, swish, swish. Those rays of light struck Zen and Dorothea but did not cause any harm to them. Zen's body was as strong as a sacred weapon, while Dorothea had her life vitality to protect her. These runes of 3rd and 4th grades could not harm them. Who are you? The Heavenly Stellar Palace is an important place to the World Commercial Alliance. Whoever trespasses will become our enemy. Dozens of figures flashed and appeared. The man in the lead had a handsome face and bright eyes. He held a curved blade in his hand. He looked at Zen with a surprised expression. Zen smiled and shouted, "Owen! Oh my goodness, Zen!" Owen sized up Zen a few times and his eyes flashed with happiness. "You're back." This was not the first time Zen had left the central region, nor the longest that they hadn't had any news from him. Most people often thought he was dead. Although they were still worried about him going to the 4 divine kingdoms this time, they knew that he would return sooner or later. They just didn't expect him to come back so early. But the chaotic ocean of stars. Every other week, the World Commercial Alliance would send back news from the far east of the central region. The storm in the sky of the chaotic ocean of stars had been triggered a few months ago. The storm was so powerful that it could even stop the Soul Sea Realm martial artists. If martial artists from the Divine Kingdom continent wanted to enter the central region, they had to wait for the storm to stop. The storm was the central region's natural barrier. Since the storm had already started, the Divine Kingdom continent and the central region were completely isolated. So they wondered how Zen was able to return. Looking at the curious expression on Owen's face, Zen smiled and said, "Why is the Heavenly Stellar Palace so heavily guarded?" Right now, the World Commercial Alliance was the most powerful in the central region, and Oracle City was the headquarters of the Alliance. No one would dare to intrude the city. The Alliance had dispatched many guards to protect the Heavenly Stellar Palace. It seemed like they were keeping guard against someone. Owen said, "Zen, you've been away from the central region for half a year, so you don't know what has been happening here. Simon is doing everything he can to see the Heavenly Evil Sect rebuilt, so recently he is taking action. That is why our leaders gave the order to send more guards. I also received the order some time ago and came to guard the Heavenly Stellar Palace." Simon, Zen's eyebrows creased slightly. Back then, outside Oracle City, after Zen killed Eddie, Simon ran away. At that time, Zen was too busy trying to save Letitia to deal with Simon. The central region was a vast place, so it was not easy to find someone. Since Eddie had been killed, Simon, who was weaker than Eddie, couldn't go around making waves, or he would be immediately recognized. So Zen decided not to pursue him. He didn't expect that he would be causing trouble this early. Unlike before, Zen now possessed the will of the great world. As long as he was in this great world, no matter where Simon was hiding, Zen would be able to find him in an instant. "I see," Zen sneered. "Let him live for a few more hours. Let him live a few more hours. What does he mean?" Owen thought to himself. Of course, he knew Zen's talent was extraordinary. Half a year was enough for him to reach higher levels. But even if he reached the life and death realm and could kill Simon effortlessly, he couldn't decide when Simon would die. After all, it would take a lot of effort and time to find Simon in the vast central region. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At that moment, several rays of light crossed the sky and landed right next to them. They were the 3 leaders of the World Commercial Alliance. Zen, you're back, finally. Dylan, Hobbs, Haber, and others all quickly descended into the Heavenly Stellar Palace with smiles on their faces. They knew that it might be difficult for others to obtain the life stones in the Divine Kingdom continent, but they were quite sure that it would be an easy task for Zen, who was blessed with a great destiny. Zen smiled and nodded in response. Actually, Zen was eager to enter the Heavenly Stellar Palace, but people kept arriving one after another, and so he had to show his respect to them. "Zen, who's the girl beside you?" Dylan, Hobbs and the rest looked at Dorothea, wondering who she was. They were at the later stage of the virtual tribulation realm. Even if someone was to conceal his cultivation level purposely, they would still be able to tell which levels they were at. For instance, they could feel the difference between them and Miguel, and the other Soul Sea Realm martial artists. But the girl in front of them didn't seem to be at the Life and Death Realm or the Soul Sea Realm. So they were quite surprised. The Soul Sea Realm was the highest realm that Dylan and the others knew. There were very few Life and Death Realm martial artists in the central region. Those who had reached the Life and Death Realm were considered the top martial artists on the continent. No one had reached the Soul Sea Realm in the history of the central region. Only the Divine Kingdom continent on the opposite side of the chaotic ocean of stars had Soul Sea Realm martial artists. They were the top powerhouses of the great world and the pillars of this world's strength. The three alliance leaders were unable to tell Dorothea's cultivation level, although they were very sure that she was not concealing it on purpose. They wondered what level she was at, and if she had surpassed Soul Sea Realm martial artists. According to the rules, such a powerful figure shouldn't have appeared. The three of them kept guessing. To them, everything Zen did was too surprising. The powerhouses that he kept bringing were getting stronger and stronger. Last time, he brought a group of Life and Death Realm martial artists and several Soul Sea Realm martial artists. The girl with him this time seemed much stronger than those. When they were on their way to the Heavenly Stellar Palace, they spotted the 8-diagram wheel above their heads, but they did not dare to get close to it. Oh, this is one of my... Zen thought for a moment, not knowing how to introduce Dorothea. After all, his identity had not been confirmed by Dorothea and the others, so he didn't know whether or not they could be considered friends. Dorothea replied warmly, "Friends. I'm Zen's friend." Dorothea seemed a little strange, but she was more polite than the people Zen brought before. Hearing Dorothea's reply, Zen nodded his head and said, "Mr. I'll be going in. I have the life stones with me." Everyone nodded heads, but no one followed Zen in. They knew about his relationship with Letitia and wanted to give them privacy. Besides, the Heavenly Stellar Palace was considered a forbidden area in Oracle City. Other than Margaret and a few female servants, no one else was allowed to go in. Zen went straight to the Heavenly Stellar Palace and Dorothea followed close behind him. There was already a servant girl waiting by the door, and seeing Zen enter, she obediently said, "Mr. Luo, Miss Ning is listening to the zither in the garden behind the palace. Please follow me. She's listening to the zither." Zen could not believe her words. She's awake. The day before, when Zen had secretly checked on Letitia, she was still sleeping. Now she was listening to the zither. The servant girl smiled and said, "You will know soon enough." After they passed through the Heavenly Stellar Palace, they came to an open backyard that was filled with all kinds of flowers and grass. There was a clear pond at the side that was filled with pink lotus flowers. The backyard looked peaceful, but Zen felt hundreds of defensive runes around. He smiled as the beautiful sound of zither floated into his ears. Not far away, he saw Letitia dressed in ice blue, lying on an elegant bed. Close to her, a girl in a purple dress played the zither with greatest skills. While plucking the strings with her fingers, her life vitality surrounded her, allowing her to play music beautifully. She was focused on playing her zither when she heard someone come behind her. Then she said to her maid expressionlessly, "Faye, bring the fresh flower tea over." Chapter 911, Meet Again. The person playing the zither was none other than Margaret. She had been missing Zen terribly ever since he had left. She didn't care about becoming his wife, her biggest wish was to stay by his side. Even when Brent, who had also disappeared for a long time, had come to Oracle City after the ethereal spirit sect had been rebuilt and offered to take her back, Margaret had turned him down. She wanted to wait for Zen here. That way, if he returned, she would at least be able to see him as soon as he came back. Margaret hadn't returned to the ethereal spirit sect. But the World Commercial Alliance had contributed quite a bit to help rebuild the sect because of her. The relationship between the World Commercial Alliance and the ethereal spirit sect was by no means strained. And even though Margaret was a delicate woman, her strength had skyrocketed after she had activated the purple power body. Even though she was only at the internal elixir realm right now, she was strong enough that she could be counted as one of the top 3 warriors in the central region, thanks to the power that she drew from the purple power world. On that particular day, Margaret had summoned countless huge swords and killed countless warriors of the heavenly evil sect. That scene was still fresh in everyone's mind. If Zen was key to fighting the heavenly evil sect, then it could be said that Margaret was the second most important person. But Margaret was not as well known as Zen, and a majority of the warriors did not even know how the huge swords had appeared. Other than a few strong warriors, most people did not know that there was such a powerful woman in the central region. That was because Margaret had been spending most of her time in the Heavenly Stellar Palace. She could tolerate each passing hour, but her longing for Zen had been increasing with each passing day. Sometimes, when she was in a good mood, she would instruct the servant girl to bring the unconscious Letitia out to bask in the sun. She herself would concentrate on playing the zither, and this, more often than not, eased her yearning for Zen. When Margaret heard footsteps behind her, she thought it was her servant girl, Faye. She had asked her to fetch the tea that she'd made, but there was no response from Faye. The string of the zither in her hand twisted slightly and her brow creased. Margaret was still the same old arrogant young miss, it was just that she would hide her true colors before Zen. She got angry when Faye didn't respond. Faye, Margaret's voice had an ominous ring to it. She twisted the zither string in her hand and it began to vibrate at her irritation. Her yearning for Zen was the reason behind her agitation. "Why aren't you answering me?" Margaret asked angrily, her frown deepening. She pushed away the zither and turned around. She was not prepared for who was standing before her. Zen stared at Margaret, a smile on his face. Margaret's lips trembled and she took a few steps forward. Then she barreled on and threw herself into Zen's arms. Half a year of being apart was just a few moments to a warrior, but to Margaret, it had felt like an eternity. Margaret didn't close her eyes when she enjoyed Zen's warmth. Then she found Dorothea, who was standing behind him. Margaret was a scheming woman, but she was willing to change for Zen. No matter how many women he had, she wouldn't show any dissatisfaction. But that didn't mean that she didn't have any thoughts. She sized Dorothea up secretly. Margaret was only at the internal elixir realm, but she could feel a strong aura emitting from Dorothea. This was not soul pressure, but the unique aura of a powerful warrior. She wasn't sure what kind of strength Dorothea possessed, but she knew that she was very strong. But Margaret didn't care whether Dorothea was a strong warrior or not. She only wanted to be Zen's woman. Is this woman from one of the 4 divine kingdoms? She came all the way to the central region with Zen. Is she also his woman? But she is looking at me so strangely, Margaret thought to herself. As Margaret rested her head on Zen's shoulder, her gaze met Dorothea's. There was no woman in this world who would be willing to share her loved one with other women. Even if Margaret had taken the initiative to take care of Letitia, she was still jealous of Letitia from time to time. She'd rather sleep like Letitia as Zen ran all around the world for her. Dorothea seemed to be looking at Margaret strangely, which made Margaret feel like she was being sized up by a man instead of a woman. For a moment, Margaret was at a loss for words. What is going on? What is wrong with her? She thought, confused. How would Margaret know that Dorothea was gay? And that she was looking at Margaret because she thought that Margaret was rather appealing. Margaret felt uneasy at Dorothea's relentless stare. She glared back fiercely at Dorothea before pulling her hair to the side and blowing out a breath of warm air towards Zen, hugging him tightly. At this, Dorothea burst out into laughter. Zen gently stroked Margaret's hair, and turned to look at Dorothea asking curiously, "What are you laughing at?" "It's nothing. I just think your woman is very interesting," she answered, chuckling. Zen couldn't help but roll his eyes. He pulled away from Margaret and said, "Let me take a look at Letitia first." "Okay." Margaret nodded and stepped aside, allowing Zen to walk up to Letitia. Letitia had been in a deep sleep ever since her life energy had been sucked dry by the life and death wind. Although the servant girls in the heavenly stellar palace had taken good care of her, she still looked haggard, now that her life energy had dried up. Dorothea slowly walked over to Letitia and looked her up and down before asking Zen, "So you said that someone was waiting for your treatment. Is this her?" Zen nodded. Dorothea's eyes swept over Letitia once again and she exclaimed, "This woman's life energy has completely dried up." After a while, she shook her head and said, "No, not all. There is still a little bit left. This is weird. This usually happens when one reaches the end of their lifespan. But this woman isn't very old. It's very strange. A person was like a bowl, and the bowl was filled with life energy. As a person grew older, that life energy would constantly be consumed, and at the same time, it would also be slowly replenished. But life energy began to deplete unceasingly after the 5 aging processes, and it would stop being able to be replenished. Even with life crystals, one couldn't replenish the life energy because the bowl was broken. Letitia hadn't reached the Soul Sea realm, so she wouldn't have experienced the 5 aging processes. It was only when one's lifespan was near its end that the life energy in their body would dry up. Dorothea was really confused as to why Letitia's life energy had dried up when she was still so young. Zen answered, "Her life energy was taken away by the life and death wind from the Netherworld River." "The life and death wind?" Dorothea blinked and laughed. "Are you kidding me? The law of causality contained within the life and death wind would indeed corrode one's life energy. If she had really touched the life and death wind, she would have been dead already. How could you have kept her alive? What's more, you can't even bring the life and death wind from the Netherworld River." "It's a secret," Zen said with a cunning smile. Letitia's survival was also a part of the heavenly fragment's contribution, and it restrained the law of causality in the life and death wind. Zen of course wouldn't explain too much to Dorothea, so he merely concentrated on doing his job. He took out a life crystal from his space ring. This life crystal was almost completely formed from life energy. The life energy within it was far more than that contained within a life stone. Dorothea's eyes lit up at the sight of the life crystal in Zen's hand. "That's great." Not just Dorothea. Everyone, including the 3 leaders of the World Commercial Alliance outside the Heavenly Stellar Palace, had felt a strong life energy radiating from it when Zen had brought out the life crystal. The life crystal was rare even in the upper world. However, Dorothea had originally wanted to say that it would be a waste to use it that way. But considering that Zen had obtained it, she felt that she was not qualified to speak. It was as if Zen was holding not a piece of ore, but a living creature that radiated a strong life energy in all directions. He placed the life crystal on Letitia's face and gently pinched it. The surface of the life crystal cracked, and Zen retracted his hand fast as lightning. The life energy was like a living thing and would enter the body of the nearest creature, and Zen was afraid that the life energy would enter his hand. A dense flow of life energy floated above Letitia, twisting into all kinds of irregular shapes. After a few seconds, the dense life energy seeped into Letitia's thin lips. Chapter 912. Letitia woke up. After her life energy was drained, Letitia's appearance did not change. However, anyone who saw her could feel that the life energy in her body was very weak and could only keep her sleeping. With the continuous infiltration of the life energy of the life crystal, Letitia's pale and haggard face started to change. Her paleness gradually faded away and her cheeks became flushed once again. She now looked like she had regained her strength and energy. As for Margaret and Dorothea, they could also feel the life energy in Letitia's body increasing rapidly. They could feel like she was suddenly emitting a strong life energy. Letitia was originally like a withered tree, but now new buds began to sprout and roots began to spread, giving people a sense of vitality and hope once again. Letitia had now absorbed all the life energy contained in the life crystal. Zen stared at her, his eyes filled with anxiety. "Why doesn't she wake up?" he murmured. His eyes gradually darkened. The biggest reason for him to go to the Divine Kingdom continent was to find a way to save Letitia. The life crystal was his only hope. She had absorbed all of its life energy and she looked better, so why was she still unconscious? Zen. Margaret felt sorry for him and was hoping to console him. Zen, however, was like an iron statue, standing where he was without moving an inch. A look of surprise covered Dorothea's face, and her mouth opened slightly. She knew that after most of Letitia's life energy had been drained by the life and death wind, her body had activated its self-protection mechanism and forced itself to go to sleep. Only by doing so, Letitia would be able to save the last bit of life energy that she had within her. The flower in Dorothea's right eye turned slightly and an intangible sensation spread through her. Soon, a smile appeared on her face. Her talent was the flower in her right eye. She was much more sensitive towards souls than other cultivators of the same level. That was when she realized that Letitia had already woken up. Zen has good taste when it comes to women, Dorothea thought to herself. Then, using her life vitality, she told Zen, "She is awake now." What? Zen's heart skipped a beat at Dorothea's words. When he saw Letitia pretending to be asleep with her eyes closed, he felt both angry and amused. Letitia had a lot of tricks up her sleeve. When she was before the elders of the Cloud Hall, she seemed very solemn, but most of the time she had the temperament of a child. Zen rolled his eyes and waved his hand. He then sighed and said, "She hasn't woken up yet. Let's leave." Margaret did not know what was going on and looked at Zen with a puzzled expression. Dorothea smiled and patted Margaret's shoulder. "He's right, let's just leave. It doesn't seem like she will wake up anytime soon." As Dorothea touched her, Margaret immediately moved a few steps away from her and glared at her as if she had been bitten by a scorpion. Dorothea didn't seem to care and only chuckled before the 3 of them left the courtyard. Right after Zen and the others left, Letitia's fingers trembled slightly. If ordinary mortals had been sleeping like this for several months, their body functions would have been affected. They wouldn't even be able to walk for a long time, and their eyes would be closed for a long time, unable to withstand the sunlight or see anything around them. However, for Letitia, a life and death realm warrior, it was not a big problem. After all, warriors could cultivate in seclusion for 8 to 10 years, which was quite common. Their body functions were far superior to those of the mortals. Her fingers trembled for a moment, and then her body turned and floated into the air. She was very petite and was wearing an ice blue palace dress. The ribbons of the dress danced with her body, like blue ice flowers dancing in the cold wind. After her feet landed on the ground, she had a sly smile on her face as she carefully walked towards the main hall. However, before she could enter the hall, a figure suddenly came out and firmly held her in his arms tightly. Arg! Letitia let out a sharp scream, frightened at Zen's sudden appearance. She had not used her perception to search around the palace. Otherwise, she would have discovered Zen, who had been hiding behind a pillar. The 2 of them hugged each other tightly, forgetting everything around them. Zen lowered his head and kissed on her lips. Zen lifted Letitia's petite body in the air with his embrace. Her feet could barely touch the ground. She wasn't scared of losing balance and falling. She trusted Zen with her life and knew he would always catch her. They hugged and kissed for a long time. Margaret and Dorothea stood in the main hall, quietly watching them. A myriad of emotions flooded Margaret. During the past 6 months, she had repeatedly reminded herself of who she was and her worth. She knew very well that Letitia was much more important to Zen than her. She couldn't help but feel jealous of Letitia. But she tried her best to remove those thoughts from her head, calm herself down and stay in the heavenly stellar palace with the other servant girls to take care of Letitia. Before this day, Margaret had thought she could peacefully accept the fact that she and Letitia would share Zen. But now, Margaret realized how fragile and ridiculous her thoughts were. It should be even more difficult for a woman to overcome her jealousy than it was for a man to overcome his lust. Dorothea could feel Margaret's emotions draining from her soul. Through the flower in her right eye, Dorothea could easily see people's souls and know of all their feelings and fears. She turned her head to glance at Margaret, and then said with a smile, "All men are like this. They are all two-timers, huh?" Margaret rolled her eyes at Dorothea. Dorothea was also a beauty. Aside from the strange flower in her right eye, she was still beautiful. Margaret, however, was still feeling uneasy close to Dorothea. "Humph, men are all two-timers, but Zen is an exception," Margaret retorted. Dorothea, however, smiled and said, "Indeed. Zen is an outstanding man. But in the end, he has more than one woman. What a pity. How about?" As she spoke, Dorothea took another look at Margaret. "How about what?" Margaret was slightly stunned. "How about you marry me?" Dorothea giggled. When Margaret heard this, she glared at Dorothea furiously, and without containing her anger, she scolded her for the first time, "How dare you?" Zen and Letitia embraced and kissed for a long time before separating. She stared at Zen, who was just inches away from her. She had a sweet smile on her face, but it quickly disappeared. "Eddie," she murmured. After being hit by the life and death wind, Letitia had fallen into a deep slumber. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious, nor did she know about the battle with the heavenly evil sect. Although Zen was standing before her, safe and sound, she couldn't help but worry about everything that had happened. "He is dead. I killed him," Zen replied immediately. Letitia nodded her head. Since Zen was standing right in front of her, Eddie's chances of survival were very low. But she could not figure out how Zen defeated Eddie and how he killed him. Zen briefly recounted the events that happened after Letitia fell asleep. As for his journey to the Divine Kingdom continent to find the life stones, he only mentioned it briefly. Although Zen had concealed the hardships of the trip to the Divine Kingdom continent, Letitia could guess that he had gone through a tough time. She leaned on Zen's chest and asked him to tell her more details. He could only answer truthfully. As she listened to Zen retell his stories, she used her fingers to lightly draw circles on his chest, her mind wandering away. Chapter 913, Borrowing the 8-diagram wheel. As Zen narrated the dangerous moments, life vitality began to flash across Letitia's slender fingers. A blue, icy chill slithered through Zen's clothes and hit his chest. Normally, this kind of a chill could not hurt Zen. However, the force of it was too strong, and he could still feel the piercing cold when not using his life vitality to block it. She was as if scolding him for taking such risks. The two of them lost track of time as they talked and confided in each other, the world outside forgotten. An hour passed by quietly. Some time later, strange sounds of some animal echoed in the sky. Caw, caw, a furry figure descended rapidly. The little thing was born with the ability to fly. It was able to bypass the restraints of the 5th layer of space law and directly jump out of the refracted space. However, it had only been a short while since it was born. Although flying came to it naturally, it was not something it was skilled at yet. Due to incorrect estimation of the distance and its inexperience in controlling the speed, it whirled down from the sky and smashed to the ground like a meteorite, creating a huge pit. Letitia let out a small cry and frowned, vexed that their romantic time was disturbed like this. She looked at the little thing in the pit with annoyance, asking, "What is this?" Caw, caw, the ancestral dragon had originally been placed on the 8-diagram wheel. Perhaps because it had been separated from Zen for too long that it was unhappy and had jumped off the wheel. It shook its head with vigor to shake off the dirt on its body, rushing towards Zen the very next moment. At the moment, Zen was holding Letitia in his arms. The little ancestral dragon butted in and forcibly pushed Letitia to the side. It made some noises as if in disapproval of Letitia. Seeing this, Zen was both irritated and amused. Although he had come to obtain this small dragon, he had not communicated much with this little dragon on his way back from the heavenly stellar sacred place. He had never expected it to be so jealous. The ancestral dragon had imprinted on Zen. It regarded Zen as its family, so in its mind, it would not allow anyone else to get closer to Zen. However, Letitia was somewhat indignant at being intruded upon by this unexpected animal. The ancestral dragon's appearance was peculiar indeed. It looked similar to a seahorse, so at first sight she didn't recognize that it was, in fact, a dragon. She reached out to push it to the side coarsely. However, as soon as Letitia extended her hand, the little dragon grew enraged. Caw, caw, the little dragon's voice sharpened, a unique power bursting out of its body. Letitia took a few steps back under the force of the power. The dragon's hostility made her tremble in shock. Not just Letitia, even Margaret, who was standing not so far away, felt the strong aura. The crowd waiting outside the heavenly stellar palace shivered. The aura did not feel like it had come from a human. It was domineering and inhumane. Only Dorothea looked on indifferently. Although the ancestral dragon was very powerful, it had only just broken out of its shell. Furthermore, she was proficient in soul-related cultivation methods, so the aura had no effect on her. As Dorothea observed that Letitia and Margaret looked slightly pale, the flower in her right eye revolved gently. With a wave of her hand, a faint circle of light floated over and enveloped the ancestral dragon, trapping the aura it exuded. Margaret and Letitia immediately felt better. The dragon was born not so long ago, but it is still very dangerous. Its wisdom has not been fully awakened and its intelligence is akin to that of a 3-year-old child. Don't provoke the creature. Zen scooped up the ancestral dragon in his arms and glared at it. He still had not decided how to deal with this little companion. He would ask the cyan dragon what to do about it after he was done his affairs. Dragon, did you just say that this is a dragon? Letitia asked, her eyes fixed on the little one. She couldn't believe that the tiny creature was a dragon. It didn't look like one at all. Zen nodded, not denying it. The ancestral dragon seemed to have understood Letitia's words, for it raised its voice, the hostility in the noise obvious. Be it a dragon or otherwise, it is very cute, Margaret said from the side, smiling. Caw, caw, the ancestral dragon seemed to understand what the people were saying. Perhaps because Margaret had praised it, it suddenly left Zen's embrace and flew straight into Margaret's arms. The dragon licked Margaret with its soft tongue. A strange look was plastered across Zen's face as he witnessed this. He too had no idea why the little dragon was treating them differently. Letitia pouted at the ancestral dragon, but her gaze was focused on Dorothea. The woman had easily confined the little dragon's power with a simple gesture. Letitia could tell that her skill was exceptional. However, she had no idea what kind of method the woman had employed. Letitia tried to glean more but was only surprised. She couldn't see through the woman's cultivation. Letitia had already entered the life and death realm. She could even distinguish if a warrior was at the soul sea realm. However, she felt that the life vitality released by Dorothea was much purer and refined than that of a mighty one of the soul sea realm. Zen, Letitia began. This is the woman I mentioned to you. Zen continued, she is from the celestial position. There are altogether 7 of them who have come to the central region. Why would they come to the central region? Letitia asked. Zen shook his head and smiled. I may only be able to stay for a short period in the central region. I'll be leaving soon. Thanks to Dorothea, who had persuaded the several other celestial position warriors to go to central region with Zen, he was able to come back and revive Letitia. Otherwise, they would have accompanied Zen to the sea god continent in search of the Tower of Sin. You are leaving again, Margaret and Letitia exclaimed at the same time. They didn't expect that Zen would leave again so soon after his stay in the Oracle City. He had barely been here for half a day. Zen nodded. Yes, but I will be back as soon as possible. At this moment, an impatient voice rang out from outside of the heavenly stellar palace. Zen, I have given you enough time. It was Woody's rough voice. Zen frowned, his face darkening. He led Letitia and a few others out of the main hall of the heavenly stellar palace. At the main entrance of the palace, Dylan and the others were looking fixedly at the 8-diagram wheel nearby. The wheel rotated slowly as 6 people stood on top of it. Beside them, a woman lay on the side. It was Brianna from the dragon lineage human. Whether it was the 6 people standing or the woman lying down, they were all powerful in their cultivation. The aura they emanated far surpassed that of mighty warriors of the soul sea realm. Wry smiles were evident on the faces of Hobbs and the rest. The people that Zen brought back were more intimidating than the previous ones, but what was troubling was that this time they didn't even seem to be friendly with Zen himself. Any of these individuals could destroy the central region with a simple flick of their hands. It was not a wise decision to offend them. They were cold, aloof, and didn't seem to like anyone approaching them. Dylan, who had the gift of the gab, could not find any opportunity to speak up. The difference in strength was too great and made him lose the courage to talk. Facing Woody's cold face, Zen's expression was indifferent. "It has only been 2 hours, why are you in such a hurry?" he asked in a monotone voice. "Humph, I have a lot of time, but there is no reason to waste it on you," Woody responded, snorting dismissively. Zen smiled faintly. His gaze passed by Woody and landed on someone else. He cupped his hands at Max, who was at a little distance. "Max, thank you for bringing me back to the central region. However, I have one more thing left to do before we set out. I want to borrow the 8-diagram wheel from you." Hearing this, Woody was even more displeased. "What, you still want to waste more of our time? How about we just stay and live here with you?" he asked mockingly. Chapter 914, Track. Woody's face had signs of clear dissatisfaction. Max, however, asked, "I'm not in a hurry. But Zen, why do you want to borrow the 8-diagram wheel?" Zen smiled and explained, "I have an enemy who is hiding in the central region and I want to kill him before I leave. Our feud has gone on long enough, I believe." Those who knew about Simon were really surprised when they heard Zen's resolution. He wanted to kill his enemy right now. More importantly, it was Simon he wanted to kill. The way they saw it, although Simon was building up his forces, he was still not as flippant and impudent as Eddie was. In fact, he could even be described as cautious in his actions. The World Commercial Alliance was well informed and had a remarkable number of intelligence sources in the central region, but they couldn't be able to find him anytime soon. An interesting aspect about people whose cultivation had reached a realm higher than the Soul Sea realm was that their temper was known to be short. They were already impatient and would get pissed off real soon. Furthermore, they didn't seem to have a good rapport with Zen. Dylan spoke up and tried to warn Zen, "Zen, a clever rabbit has 3 burrows. It's going to take us a long time before we can unearth Simon's location. If he finds out that you've returned to the central region, he might even not dare to show up. Please take your time." Zen waved off the warning. How could he allow Simon to pose potential danger to him? If chances were that Simon would stay in seclusion and become a hermit who stood aloof from worldly matters, Zen might have let him go. After all, he didn't like killing, but he was determined to kill his enemies without fail. If the person in front of him was not guilty beyond forgiveness, he would let him or her go. However, Simon was the kind of person who did not know what was good for him and actually wanted to try and re-establish the heavenly evil sect. He had even tried that while Zen was away from the central region, which meant that Zen wasn't going to let him go so easily. "Oh, that's such a trifle for us. It won't take too much time." Max nodded and continued, "All right then. Tell us where he is hiding, and I'll have Hank control the 8-diagram wheel and follow you." Woody's face was filled with indignation. In his opinion, it was one thing that Zen was an outstanding and talented warrior, but this guy was most likely just a swindler or a nobody at the life and death realm. How could he be allowed to order them around? To be direct and blunt, Woody felt that Zen was not qualified. Zen wasn't even looking at Woody. He thanked Max, "Thank you so much." He then turned towards Letitia and Margaret and told them, "You guys hang on. I'll be right back." But Zen, Simon, Dylan was still worried. Zen gave him a calm smile to set him ease. "Mr. She, don't worry, I know what I'm doing." With a slight whistle, the ancestral dragon left Margaret's arms and jumped into Zen's, who then stepped onto the 8-diagram wheel. Considering Zen's extremely high speed and factoring in the size of the central region, it would take him at least 2 to 3 days to find and kill Simon. This was because he would have to waste a lot of time unearthing his enemy. But with the help of the 8-diagram wheel, it would take him less than an hour to traverse the entire central region. After he got on the wheel, a thought flashed through his mind and memories of the great world began to appear next. The memories then expanded and began to encompass everything in this great world, including all the continents, oceans, skies, birds, and beasts. Furthermore, the time span also increased and he could see through the very fabric of time into the remote ages. After a few moments of investigation, Zen managed to lock onto Simon's position. "There you are." His eyes flashed gently before he told Hank where Simon was. As the wheel started to rotate lightly, Zen and the others started to gradually ascend into the sky. Then, out of the blue, their speed suddenly increased and like a shooting star, they became a straight line and disappeared into the horizon within 3 seconds. Their speed is remarkable. Dylan looked at the disappearing 8-diagram wheel inside. Hobbs shook his head and remarked, "You know what? Zen's level of contact with the world is no longer something we can understand. 3 years ago, Zen was just a newbie, but still a rising star in the central region. Today, the tables had turned and he had become a figure that these guys looked up to. In fact, they could hardly have reached him now." Letitia asked with a smile on her face, "But he's still the Zen we know, isn't he?" Hearing this, the 3 leaders nodded at the same time. Zen had been able to kill Eddie when he was only at the middle stage of the virtual tribulation realm. Now, he had broken through into the life and death realm, and his strength was even more unfathomable, yet he was still as friendly to them as ever. He wasn't pushy and overbearing and wasn't overly proud of himself. It was a great fortune indeed to have Zen as their friend. The southern area of the central region had been marked by the Southern Sky Mountain some time ago. It was a famous mountain in the central region, but some time ago, every single mountain in this place had been destroyed. Naturally, Southern Sky Mountain was no exception. After it was destroyed, a tributary of a big river flowed in, submerging the entire area and converting it into a swamp. As Simon looked at this swamp, filled with mud and decay, his eyes revealed a hint of anger. In the early days, he had lived in seclusion in the dreamy swampland for hundreds of years, and he was already tired of that sight. Afterwards, he had finally managed to establish the heavenly evil sect with Eddie, which had changed his life. Then Zen had destroyed the sect, and killed Eddie. When these events had taken place, Simon was trembling with fear, which was why he had escaped. Now as he thought about it, he regretted that. He had been either too cautious, or worse yet, too timid. Therefore, he had missed a great opportunity to kill Zen. Letitia had been attacked by the life and death wind, so she was most definitely dead now. Eddie had managed to get rid of the ancient tycoon of the World Commercial Alliance. The 3 leaders of the alliance alone could pose no real threat to Simon. Therefore, as long as he managed to kill Zen, no one in the central region could defeat him. When that day came, he would be able to establish his own divine kingdom, unify the entire central region, and become the first sole ruler of a divine kingdom in tens of thousands of years. After he had escaped from Oracle City, something like a bug was constantly biting at his warrior spirit. However, life didn't have an undo button. Since he had missed an opportunity, he couldn't go back and find it again, and it was going to be extremely difficult to find another one now. However, after finding out that Zen had left the central region, Simon had become restless again. The combination of the 3 fat leaders of the alliance was powerful, yes, but they could not do anything to him. If he really managed to re-establish the heavenly evil sect, Oracle City was too far gone to be able to stand up against him. It was difficult for him to withhold this thought. Zen had gone to the Divine Kingdom continent, which was marked with countless powerhouses. It was very likely that he wouldn't be able to return anytime soon. For Simon, this was probably the second opportunity he craved for so badly. He had already wasted the previous one, and he did not want to do the same on his next one. In the end, he decided to take actions. During the last few years, he had often sent people to scout the situation inside Oracle City. Letitia was the only life and death realm martial artist in the city, but hurt by the life and death wind, she had been in a deep slumber. If Eddie were still alive, he would have directly stormed his way into the city. However, Simon had always been a cautious and maybe even a paranoid person. He was afraid of being cheated and wanted to send people to assassinate Letitia first. To his disappointment, the Heavenly Stellar Palace was so well protected that he had yet to make a move. Today, Simon had gathered part of the old members of the Heavenly Evil sect to discuss this issue. Before their meeting could convene, he suddenly saw a thin line appear in the sky. Like a shooting star it was, only the moment that it appeared, it shot towards him at an extremely fast pace. Its speed was just indescribable. "What's that?" Simon's eyelids twitched. He didn't know why, but he had a bad premonition in his heart about this. However, he couldn't pinpoint where it came from. Upon hearing his words, several, or rather all the subordinates of the Heavenly Evil sect also raised their heads and turned around to look at the strange, newly appeared object. "It's an abnormal phenomenon. Thank you for stating the obvious. Are we going to get a secret treasure today? Should we fly up and take a look?" No one could figure out where the streak had come from, and their faces were full of curiosity. Perhaps Simon was the only one who had a bad feeling about this. However, as it flew, the line, which had originally been flying parallel to the ground, slightly changed its direction and began heading straight towards Simon and his men. Simon's eyes opened wide as a sense of danger arose from the depths of his soul. Although he still couldn't see clearly what it was, he was sure that it definitely wasn't a good thing for him. What if that thing hit him? The momentum it carried was terrifying due to its high speed, and he still didn't know what or how heavy it was. Only 6 seconds after the 8-diagram wheel had appeared in front of Simon, it steadily stopped above him and began to descend. When Zen's figure appeared in front of Simon, his entire body was like a carved stone. He was terrified instantly. Chapter 915, Shooting. Zen, it's Zen, said one of Simon's men as he trembled in fear. But Simon didn't need to be reminded. He had already seen Zen himself. In truth, Zen was the only person that the remaining confederates of the heavenly evil sect were afraid of. The scene of Zen killing Eddie was etched in their minds. It haunted them like a nightmare, one that they might not forget for the rest of their lives. Simon was extremely nervous, but his mind was racing. He first sized up Zen and discovered that he had broken through to the life and death realm. Zen was currently at the first level of the life and death realm. Despite that, he still had a chance to escape. Since Zen had returned to the central region, Simon thought that he could choose to leave the central region and escape overseas and never set foot in the central region again. However, when Simon glanced at the people around Zen, his face darkened, revealing an expression of utter despair. He could not read the strength of these people. This could only mean one thing: the gap between him and them was far more than a realm. A bitter taste filled Simon's mouth, which was even more bitter than the most toxic poison he had made. Is he the guy you want to kill? Do you need some help? If you want to kill him, one swipe will finish him. Woody raised his black saber and glanced at Simon casually. Meanwhile, Delroy and the others just closed their eyes and concentrated on their cultivation. They didn't bother dealing with a life and death realm warrior from the lower world. A warrior at such a level was nothing more than an ant to them. Why would they bother about an ant? Zen obviously knew that Woody didn't really want to help him. They just didn't want to waste time here. So Zen just shook his head and said, "I'll handle this person myself," he said. Suddenly Simon took out 2 black beads. Although he was in despair, he still had a desire to live. Seeing that Zen was about to attack him, Simon's life vitality suddenly surged. He crushed the 2 black beads in his hands and they emitted black poisonous mists, and his surging life vitality instantly made these mists spread. Oh Lord, how can you? Simon's subordinates did not expect him to activate the black beads without any warning. The poison contained in them was very powerful. The faces of the few virtual tribulation realm warriors nearby immediately turned black and they instantly dropped dead. Whoosh! Using the cover of the poisonous mists, Simon turned into a beam of light and flew backwards. No one has come after me. There is still a ray of hope. Anticipation filled Simon's heart. He noticed that Zen was standing firmly on the 8-diagram wheel without moving an inch. Dorothea was also sitting on the 8-diagram wheel, but she suddenly turned around and reminded, "He's going to run away." Zen nodded and replied confidently, "He can't escape." He took out a dark golden longbow and a black arrow from his quiver. "Oh, a semi-divine level bow and a divine level arrow," Woody noted, but there was something odd about the way he said it. It was hard to tell whether he said this because he was envious or he was just ridiculing him. Delroy opened his eyes slightly, glanced at Zen and then closed his eyes again. Divine weapons were rare in the upper world. However, Zen's bow was only a semi-divine weapon. The black arrow was as powerful as a divine weapon, but it could only be used once, so he did not take them seriously. It was Zen's first time using this bow. In any case, as long as he was in this great world, it was impossible for Simon to escape from his grip. Zen had indeed treated him as a target. He notched the arrow on his longbow. He seemed to have formed a connection with it. It was as if the black arrow could understand his intentions, and Zen, in turn, could control the black arrow as he wanted. This divine weapon can be connected to the person who uses it. Zen wondered curiously. To date, the best weapon he possessed was this dark golden bow, but it was only a semi-divine weapon. He wanted to have a divine-level sword, but he was afraid that it would be difficult to obtain one currently. Perhaps he would only find one in the upper world. Draw the bow. Buzz. As Zen drew the bow, it emitted a faint ringing sound. He had used the power of nearly 200 dragon scales just to draw the bow. His vision was blocked by a black poisonous mist, so he could not see Simon's figure clearly with his eyes. Zen did not know how far he had fled as he was very fast, but a thought flashed in his mind and he immediately closed his eyes. He searched for Simon's location in his mind, using the will of the great world. "I found him," he muttered, and then he loosened his fingers, releasing the arrow. Whoosh! The black arrow shot out, piercing through the thick poisonous mists. It wasn't very fast in the start. It went at the same speed as a normal Soul Sea Realm Master would when he flew at full speed. However, when the black arrow was released, Zen could still feel that his soul was connected to it. He could feel that this black arrow seemed to contain 3 divine textures. If he wanted, he could activate the divine textures with his mind. Zen acted immediately. Boom! There was an explosion somewhere in the distance. With this explosion, the black arrow suddenly became twice as fast. Explode again, commanded Zen. Boom! The speed of the black arrow increased again. The more speed the arrow gained, the more powerful it would be. Explode again. Boom! Now the black arrow had reached its maximum speed. At this speed, not even a Soul Sea Realm Master would be able to dodge it. Even Zen had used Brianna's body when he had faced the arrow for the first time, he had only narrowly escaped it. But Simon was only a life and death realm warrior. He was desperately trying to escape. As he flew, he released his perception and discovered that Zen wasn't chasing him. But while he was using his perception to probe, he discovered that an arrow had appeared behind him. He is shooting an arrow at me. Simon immediately dismissed the thought. It was impossible. At his speed, ordinary arrows wouldn't be able to catch up to him at all. Unfortunately, the black arrow had already surpassed his thinking. The black arrow had already penetrated the back of his head and come out from his forehead, leaving behind only a small bloody hole. He froze mid-air. His remaining life vitality was still working, causing him to float in the air. After a few seconds, when his life vitality dispersed, his body fell from the sky like a heavy sandbag, smashing into a hill with a loud crash. Thump! Zen turned the longbow lightly and put it back in his space ring. Then he smiled at Max and said, "Thank you, Max. I've already killed the person I wanted to." Some confederates of the heavenly evil sect still remained, but the virtual tribulation realm martial artists meant nothing to him. It was not worth his time or energy to kill them. It had taken Zen only a quarter of an hour, from the beginning when they had set out from Oracle City to the time they had arrived at the southern Sky Mountain to kill Simon. Max nodded slightly. Since Zen had settled all his matters, they could finally head back. Next, they would set off to find the Tower of Crystal. Soon after, Hank operated the 8-diagram wheel and returned to the Oracle City. At this time, everyone was gathered in front of the Heavenly Stellar Palace. When they saw that the 8-diagram wheel had returned, the 3 leaders of the World Commercial Alliance and Letitia were in a state of confusion. It had only been a while since they left. How did they return so quickly? To their surprise, Zen told them that he had already killed Simon at the southern Sky Mountain. Zen's efficiency stunned everyone. If one wanted to slaughter a chicken, one would have to sharpen the knife first. But, in such a short period of time, Zen had already taken the life of Simon, who was thousands of miles away. Chapter 916, Back to the Sea God Continent. The group of Spirit Supreme Realm warriors from the Celestial Position race had given Zen quite a bit of time to stay in the central region. It was now time for him to leave. However, Letitia and Margaret weren't pleased with the news. They had only been with Zen for less than 2 hours, then he had to leave so soon. Nonetheless, Letitia knew that the group of super warriors in the 8-diagram wheel weren't particularly friendly towards Zen, and now was not the time to protest. She could only hope for Zen to return quickly to the central region after he finished what he had to do. Meanwhile, Zen felt that it would be inconvenient for him to bring Brianna on his trip to the Sea God Continent. Thus, he decided to leave her here for now and ask the people of the World Commercial Alliance to take care of her. Naturally, Dorothea was unhappy about it. The Cyan Dragon had told Zen that although the soul-sealing spell was hard to remove, he did have some clues to the solution, and he didn't need help from the Celestial Position race. Therefore, Zen didn't mind Dorothea's discontent. Besides, Brianna seemed to dislike her anyway. After Max had finished preparations, he waved his hand and etched a blood-red cross-shaped rune in the Oracle City. After that, the 8-diagram wheel slowly rose up towards the sky, then headed towards the southeast direction as indicated by Zen. Zen already had a specific outline of this world's map, thanks to the Great World's memories. The land only occupied 20% of this Great World's surface, and the remaining 80% belonged to the boundless ocean. On the west side of the world were several main continents, such as the Divine Kingdom continent, the Central region, among others. In addition, a massive piece of savage land lay in the north of the Divine Kingdom continent. However, the Sea God continent was an exception. It was isolated on the other side of the Great World, which was why distinct cultures and customs flourished in it. A strong gust of wind blew against the 8-diagram wheel's sides. After the 8-diagram wheel had left the southeast area of the central region, it flew in a quick and steady speed in a straight line. Going to the sea god continent without traveling through a transmission array meant that they would have to cross nearly half of the great world. Such a thing was impossible to do in an instant, even for those Spirit Supreme Realm warriors. Although Zen could enter the Immortal Mist's celestial tomb again and use the transmission array to directly travel to the sea god continent, he still hesitated to trust the 7 people from the celestial position race. He didn't want to disturb Immortal Mist's slumber because of them. Blurry lines of blue clashed in the middle of the horizon. It was as if nothing existed between the heaven and the earth except for the dark blue sky, as they flew across the vast ocean. The 8-diagram wheel was enveloped in silence most of the time. Aside from the ancestral dragon's occasional whimpers, all the humans sat cross-legged in meditation. After Zen had seen Brianna's inner world, he knew that all the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors had opened up their inner worlds. He guessed that everyone except him were operating the inner worlds within their bodies. Ka, the small dragon that was curled up beside Zen suddenly cried out, with its large eyes fixated on him. As Zen tilted his head and smiled at the little creature in return, he suddenly remembered that he still had to figure out how to deal with it. The ancestral dragon egg was originally a task the cyan dragon entrusted to him. But ever since it had hatched out, Zen never had the time to properly think about how the small dragon should be settled. When Zen asked the cyan dragon about it, he flatly replied, "Your imprint has already affected this small dragon. Removing it by force would harm the small dragon to some degree. It might be the reason these people from the celestial position race didn't snatch the dragon from your hands. But the main reason they didn't snatch the ancestral dragon was because they had recognized Zen's identity. At the same time, they knew that forcefully erasing the imprint would negatively affect the ancestral dragon. After they had confirmed the Tower of Crystal's location, they were most likely to bring Zen to the celestial position race and employ him as the ancestral dragon's breeder. Of course, all of that depended on Zen's talent. If Zen had really obtained the golden celestial position title like he said, then everything would be completely different. Let's just wait and see what they will decide on. In my opinion, they will just let you raise the ancestral dragon as you please, the cyan dragon said and chuckled. He was quite clear that Zen hadn't lied about anything. Someone so talented like him would always catch the higher-ups' attention. After his real talent was confirmed, the people of the celestial position would take care of him, and wouldn't dare offend him. Let me raise the ancestral dragon. Zen's eyes widened in astonishment. Even from the very beginning, he had never intended nor thought about doing that. He only entered the heavenly stellar sacred place to get the ancestral dragon egg at the cyan dragon's request. Now, Zen felt that he couldn't be bothered to take care of the little creature. What's wrong? Don't you wanna give it a try? The cyan dragon calmly asked. This kind of imprint between you and the dragon is even stronger than the contract between Fiona and the genuine phoenix. Moreover, this ancestral dragon has a far greater talent than a genuine phoenix. It could be your capable assistant after it grows up, he added. But I don't know how to raise a dragon. Of course, Zen knew that the cyan dragon meant him no harm. Since the ancestral dragon was the faith of the entire genuine dragon race, it must have extraordinary talents and powers. The problem was, Zen had never planned to raise a dragon. The ancestral dragon has a very fast growth rate. It will mature soon enough so that you don't need to worry about it. Trust me, try your best to win it from the celestial position race, the cyan dragon said with a smile. Still, Zen didn't feel quite convinced. But when he glanced at the little furry fellow which curled up beside him in a deep sleep, he blinked and eventually nodded his head. For the first time ever, there was a trace of loneliness in the cyan dragon's eyes. When the red dragon noticed it, he tried to console his brother and said, "My brother, they are the first to be heartless. The race bond between them and us is already gone. Isn't it a wise choice for us to establish our own branch?" The red dragon had a quick and fiery temper, and wasn't as logical as the cyan dragon was. His younger brother shook his head and said, "After all, we came from the genuine dragon race. It's true that we can rely on the ancestral dragon to establish our own branch, but..." He stopped his words and sighed. Back then, there was a fierce dispute within the genuine dragon race, and 9 genuine dragons had paid a huge price. Until now, only 2 of them had been awakened. If they hadn't come across Zen, perhaps the old dispute and the mystery of the 9 dragons would have drowned slowly into the river of history. But as Zen grew stronger as time passed, the cyan dragon began to feel hope. If Zen and the ancestral dragon became powerful enough one day, Zen would be able to rebuild their heavenly bodies and they could establish a new genuine dragon branch. Although the cyan dragon felt happy about this prospect, he was also reminded of their previous sorrows. The 8-diagram wheel traveled extremely fast, so it only took them a few hours to reach the central region from the Divine Kingdom continent. However, it still took them a full 2 days to travel from the central region to the Sea God continent. They had encountered several huge fierce beasts along their way, such as an ocean beast with a 20,000 feet long body, and a giant bird with a wingspan of more than 10,000 feet, which made it look like a palace in the sky. However, these 11th level fierce beasts were aware of the Spirit Supreme Realm warriors on the 8-diagram wheel. They feared these warriors and thus, didn't dare provoke them. As for Dorothea and the other celestial position race warriors, they were not interested in those beasts at all. There were rarely things in the lower world that could arouse their interest. Their goal of this trip was only the Tower of Crystal. After 2 full days, a continent finally appeared before them. The Sea God continent looked exactly as Zen remembered it on the day he left. Where in this continent is the Tower of Crystal? Delroy asked indifferently. It's in the center of this continent, Zen turned to him and said. Very well, a cold smile formed on Delroy's lips. Let's go over there, he said to Hank. But Zen shook his head and said, if you want to get close to the Tower of Crystal, I'm afraid it won't be as easy as you think. What do you mean? Delroy asked with a frown. The rest of them frowned as well. Seeing was believing, as the saying went. Although Zen looked serious, they still doubted his words unless they saw the Tower of Crystal themselves. Zen answered seriously, because no warrior above the virtual tribulation realm is allowed into the cursed land. Anyone who goes there will die. Chapter 917, The Ghost Curse Spell. In the past, Mist had also entered the Sea God continent, but he had been intimidated by the cursed land. In the end, he set up a massive transmission array, connecting the 2 continents and then waiting in the celestial tomb for several years, long before Zen finally arrived. Because of that, Zen figured that Mist was a Spirit Supreme Realm expert. If he couldn't enter the cursed land, the 7 of them wouldn't be able to enter either. Before, Zen had been able to enter the cursed land unhindered. But at that time, he was only at the Illuminating Soul realm. Now, at the Life and Death realm, naturally, he would be affected by the curse's power. When Zen briefly explained the whole situation of the cursed land to everyone, Max's expression turned slightly grim. Still, he ordered Hank to control the 8-diagram wheel to move forward. They managed to fly fast above the Sea God continent. Not long after, a distinct line appeared in the Sea God continent. On the surface, everything seemed perfectly normal. Inside the line, however, it was pitch black. No plants or creatures seemed to inhabit it, it was a pitch-black world. Is this the cursed land? Max could only stare at it and wonder. When Zen nodded, Delroy went ahead and said, let's go down and take a look. As Spirit Supreme Realm experts, they weren't reckless people. Since they already knew that it was a strange land, they wouldn't dare rely on their own cultivation to forcefully break into it immediately. After the 8-diagram wheel slowly descended, the 7 of them stepped down, one after another. With the ancestral dragon still in his arms, Zen followed and jumped down. The little thing looked at the cursed land, fear growing in its eyes. It seemed worried about Zen bringing it to such a place. Gagum, the dragon went. Seeing how frightened the creature was, Zen patted its head and smiled gently, don't worry. I won't bring you in. But Zen was rather curious, this ancestral dragon had just hatched. Although it had a strong innate talent, it should have only been considered a first-level vicious beast, meaning it wouldn't be affected by the curse. Perhaps, its fear was purely instinctive. Meanwhile, Max had an evident frown on his face as he examined the area. Delroy, what do you think? Taking 2 steps forward, Delroy approached the edge. Another step forward and he would have entered the cursed land. After a short pause, he extended his hand beyond the edge. Be careful, the curse is very strong. Zen reminded him. Zen had already personally witnessed 2 war sages turn into pools of blood in an instant. The power of the curse didn't seem to be something any ordinary human could withstand. But Delroy paid him no mind and stubbornly continued to extend his hand into the cursed land. The activation of the curse would take some time, he just wanted to test how strong the curse really was. After a moment, his expression changed as he quickly retracted his hand and retreated. Dorothea. Taking 1 step forward, Dorothea had the flower in her eye spin rapidly. From the flower's pistil shone a bright pink light. Underneath, something was illuminated. After taking a look, Zen found a bunch of little ghosts. All were only about the size of a finger. In spite of their size, they looked extremely disgusting, and more so being so densely packed together, there were hundreds of them. All swarmed toward Delroy's right hand and began gnawing at it. Buzz! Buzz, buzz. To protect his right hand, Delroy activated his life vitality and opened a small enchanted barrier. The little ghosts, however, completely ignored the defense and continued attacking. The flesh and blood on his hand seemed to melt into streams of pus. It was an appalling sight. In a matter of seconds, the little ghosts ate up Delroy's right hand completely and were ready to move up along his arm. But being a bold expert, Delroy gave a pointed, calm look at Woody who stood beside him. Understanding his meaning, Woody wielded his black nether saber and swung. With only one bone left, Delroy's hand was sliced off and fell to the ground. Unable to crawl up, the little ghost simply turned around to continue gnawing at his hand bone. Dang it, what are these things? Woody could feel his scalp begin to tingle as he watched the densely packed creatures. They weren't particularly strong, but they could completely bypass the life vitality defense. They even broke through Delroy's enchanted barrier. It was just too terrifying. In spite of all that, the look in Delroy's eye was calm. With a gentle wave of his right arm, a golden spurt of blood came out from the wound. As it continued to flow, it formed the shape of his hand. And after the last bit of the golden light dissipated, it began to form the bones and meridians, quickly regenerating the skin. In only a few moments, a right hand was there once again. Even Zen was astonished. Delroy truly had great theurgy. Of course, in the lower world, a broken limb could be reconstructed. But the warrior's strength could be greatly damaged and the new limb could end up a new weakness in one's body. But the nonchalant expression on Delroy's face made Zen think that maybe he had the ability to regenerate his body without any damaging aftereffects. Under the pink light from Dorothea's right eye, the little ghosts had nowhere to hide. Everyone could hear as they crunched through the bone. The warriors trembled with fear and disgust. Slowly, Max walked over and took a closer look at the ghosts. Are these the? It's a ghost curse spell. But it's an extremely rare thing to release such a large area of the ghost curse spell in the lower world, Dorothea explained. In other aspects, Max and Delroy were quite knowledgeable already, but when it came to soul incantations, Dorothea's expertise came into play. Delroy's hand bone was eaten up rapidly. The little ghosts scattered and dashed toward the cursed land. Soon after, they disappeared from everyone's view. Observing the cursed land, Max frowned and asked Zen, "Did you say that only martial artists below the life and death realm can enter this cursed land?" With a nod, Zen answered, "In this continent, virtual tribulation realm warriors are considered warlords. Once warriors of the sea god continent become top-level warlords, they have made it to the late stage of the virtual tribulation realm, and they have to leave this cursed land. Otherwise, the curse will take their lives. The cursed land was forbidden to war sages and soul sea realm experts, after all." Flatly, Dorothea explained, "This ghost curse spell has set a target for it to take effect. It isn't difficult." "What should we do? How are we going to get to the Tower of Crystal?" asked the burly man. Staring at the cursed land, Delroy said, "I don't believe this place is filled with the ghost curse spell." With a knowing smile, Dorothea returned, "You'll know when you see it, won't you?" The moment she finished speaking, the flower in her right eye began to spin, emitting a pink light 100 times broader than the last one. In this moment of illumination, Zen, Max, Delroy, and the others were all astonished. An endless wave of little ghosts filled the cursed land. Because there were too many, they had to squeeze together. They were in a constant state of crazy squirming. Because it was too crowded, the ghosts seemed to devour each other. But soon afterward, new little ghosts would be born. Cough kof kof. Goosebumps rose all over Woody's body. In a haste, he said, "Dorothea, extinguish that light." It wasn't just Woody. Other than Max and Dorothea, the rest looked absolutely horrified. It made Zen frown. He was the only one among them who had entered the cursed land. Never did he think that in the seemingly empty place, ghosts were already lining up. A chill crept up from the depths of his heart. Chapter 918, A War. The pink light that Dorothea released was able to reveal the true form of this cursed land. Had Zen been aware of the amount of ghosts that filled this cursed land, he wouldn't have ever thought of entering it in the first place. Even Woody and Delroy were obviously unsettled, prompting Dorothea to extinguish the pink light with a hint of a smile. Once the light was gone, any hint of ghosts disappeared and the black cursed land appeared as empty as it had been before. Huff, huff, so disgusting. Woody heaved as he touched his chest in mild alarm. Max also shook his head. "In that case, it seems impossible for us to break in." Delroy nodded at his words. "We can't resist these ghosts. We'll be devoured completely if we force our way in. It seems the only thing we can do is to report this matter to the upper leaders." Max sighed. "Our trip to the lower world has been fruitless. We failed to capture the evil dragon. And the ancestral dragon. He couldn't help but glance at Zen upon mentioning the ancestral dragon that had since imprinted on Zen. Now that we can't confirm anything about the Tower of Crystal, are we really just going back empty-handed? Delroy shrugged helplessly. Well, what else do you want to do? Max set his eyes on Zen, his gaze somewhat calculating. I want to enter the Tower of Crystal and take a look. Delroy couldn't help but roll his eyes. The cursed land wasn't just some place they could enter so easily, which was already obvious from what they had just seen earlier. Max, in Delroy's opinion, was spouting nonsense. However, just as he was about to tell him off, an idea suddenly popped in Woody's head. Hey Zen, he said, turning to the youth beside him. You knew we wouldn't be able to enter this cursed land all along, didn't you? You were just randomly bragging about that title you've obtained. We'd be unable to verify it anyway. Zen rolled his eyes and sneered but didn't bother to argue. Max ignored this exchange and turned his attention to Hank. Did you bring any puppets with you this time? He asked. Everyone's eyes suddenly lit up with hope. Puppets. That's right, Hank's puppets could work. Not only was Hank proficient in all sorts of flying tools, he was also a master puppeteer. If they could take advantage of his puppets, they'd be able to get through the cursed land with no problems. They still wanted to take a look at the Tower of Crystal, Woody in particular since he really wanted to expose Zen and his lies. The youth would have a lot of explaining to do if it turned out that his title wasn't on the talent tablet. However, Hank's next words would wipe away any hope they all had. I didn't bring any puppets with me. Everyone's shoulders slumped at his reply. Their last sliver of hope was gone. But it shouldn't be difficult for you to gather some materials around and make a few of them, right? Max prodded. Hank nodded in affirmation. Yes, that won't be a problem, but the puppets won't be that powerful since the materials would come from the lower world. I'm afraid I can't produce puppets that would be at the Soul Sea realm. Puppets at the Soul Sea realm. That meant Hank could produce puppets that were way stronger. Zen couldn't help but let out a sigh and finally understood why these celestial position warriors had been so arrogant. The disparity between the lower world and upper world was just too great. That's fine, we don't need puppets to be that powerful. As long as they can help us cross the cursed land, they would do. We can just scrounge up some materials. Woody sneered, side-eyeing Zen. He had wanted to see if he looked anxious or uneasy. Liars usually were nervous just before their lies were exposed. However, none of those emotions were traceable in Zen's features. Instead, he even stepped forward to volunteer. I'm very familiar with a few races on the Sea God continent. They might have the materials you need, which will be easier for us than searching for them ourselves. That's great. Max smiled in relief. Once the discussion was done, everyone quickly returned to the 8-diagram wheel and headed straight towards the direction Zen had indicated, which would lead them to the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. The Sea God continent wasn't that big, especially since the cursed land occupied a huge chunk of its center. The areas surrounding the cursed land were actually even smaller than the central region, so it only took a few minutes for the 8-diagram wheel to arrive above the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. However, just as they arrived, a concerning sight came into Zen's view. A long column of smoke rose from the holy tree in the distance and massive waves of life vitality were spread out all over the land. Zen's eyes immediately widened. A war. How could the other races dare challenge the Demon Knight with Amber guarding the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place? Back when he was in trouble, both the Purple Heart Sacred Place and Heavenly Feather Sacred Place had sent a number of war sages to his aid through the transmission array. Even Miguel and several other powerful warriors at the Soul Sea realm from the Demon Knight had personally come to the central region. They could freely leave their homes mostly because they knew Amber would be guarding both sacred places. She was the strongest and the most talented warrior on the Sea God continent. As long as she was there, the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and Dread Ogre Sacred Place would not dare act rashly. So what was this war happening in front of his very eyes? Did something happen to Amber? Zen's expression darkened and he jumped down from the 8-diagram wheel to rush towards the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Numerous beams of light constantly flashed and collided in the sky, a clash between war sages. Zen's gaze quickly swept over the scene and a trace of cold light appeared in his eyes. It really is the ogres. The Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. They actually dared to attack the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. Above him, two bright beams of light constantly repelled and intertwined. One was long and narrow, within which flowers constantly bloomed and flourished. Esther, Zen thought to himself, squinting to see clearer. Looking at the direction where the beam of white light flashed, Zen found that it was indeed a woman and she was rapidly moving in the sky. At this moment, Esther was in a very sorry state. Her slender body was already full of injuries and there was a gaping wound on her waist that revealed the white bone underneath the bloody flesh. However, despite the pain and suffering, she visibly gritted her teeth and continued fighting off her opponent. It was none other than a 4th-level ogre war sage. As a top-level warlord, Esther had been the most powerful warrior in the Tower of Sin. When she left the tower, she had advanced into a 1st-level war sage, and after taking advantage of the lucky light she had accumulated in the Tower of Sin, she had tried several times and finally advanced to a 2nd-level war sage. However, despite her advancements, it was evident that she still found it difficult to deal with her 4th-level war sage ogre opponent. Ha ha ha, just accept your fate and surrender, Esther. You're a beautiful demon knight woman. I don't want your looks to go to waste. I know you and I are of different races, but if you become my captive, I'll make you the happiest woman for the rest of your life. Her opponent laughed hysterically, waving the fiery red saber in his hand. Bright red lights burst from the saber and headed straight for Esther's vital parts. Zen couldn't just bear to stand by and watch. He quickly jumped up and rushed towards her. Esther's perception was extremely sharp and she was able to sense Zen's approach even as she tried to dodge the ogre's attacks. Thinking that it was another ogre that had come for her, Esther immediately swerved and launched a beam of light towards Zen, attacking him with flowers. Zen's figure flashed and quickly avoided the blooms. Esther, it's me. The sound of a familiar voice made her turn around in confusion. However, the moment she saw him, Esther's face immediately lit up with joy. She never thought Zen would suddenly appear at such a critical moment. Zen, she called out with glee. The 4th-level ogre war sage who was chasing Esther also turned his head once he heard her mention Zen's name. He too couldn't help but be stunned at his sudden arrival. Zen's name was whispered and spat like a curse in both the flaming ogre's sacred place and the dread ogre's sacred place. It was this guy and this guy alone that had driven their entire race out of the Tower of Sin. All of them knew this name despite never having seen him. Chapter 919, Stake Everything on One Throw. The ogre war sage before him had left the Tower of Sin several years ago, broken through the shackles of top-level warlords and stepped into the ranks of war sages. Naturally, now he could not enter the cursed land again, nor could he enter the Tower of Sin. This was why Zen's name was etched in his heart as a painful reminder of the past. However, he had never actually come face to face with him before. So when he heard Esther calling out Zen's name, he was very excited. Zen Luo. Zen, I felt sad when I heard that you had already left the Sea God continent. I didn't think you would dare to come back here to court death. Interesting, interesting. Esther got anxious when she saw Zen. She thought it was not the right time for him to be here. Although she saw that he had already broken through, he was still only a 1st-level war sage. Of course, Zen's strength couldn't be measured by his cultivation level. Back when he was still a warlord, he had managed to kill a war sage. The problem was that the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place had started a large-scale sect war against the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place, and there were several Soul Sea Realm martial artists among them. And Zen would not be able to defeat them. Zen, run! The Heavenly Feather Sacred Place is about to fall. Run for your life! Esther screamed with all her might. Zen, however, remained indifferent to her warning. His eyes darkened slightly. Why would the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place dare to attack the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place ruled by Amber? He asked. Before Esther could explain, the Ogre War Sage interrupted. Now that you are here, you won't be able to escape. If you think you can, it is wishful thinking on your part. He had been hearing about Zen for a long time. All the ogres in the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place hated Zen to the core. When Zen had driven the ogres out of the Tower of Sin, it was as if he had cut off the future of the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. Without access to the Tower of Sin, they would surely decline sooner or later. When the top-level warlords went back to the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place, all the ogres, whether they were war sages or war fighters, had cursed Zen. As for the war sage in front of them, Zen had angered him so much that he demolished his own house. Little wondered then that he was thirsty for revenge. If he was allowed to enter the cursed land, he probably would have torn Zen to shreds. But that wasn't possible, and now that Zen himself had come to him, how could he let him go so easily? Whoosh! Ogres' bodies were huge and this particular war sage was like a small mountain. Wind whooshed as he rushed towards Zen. The saber in his hand contained a heavy pressure as he wanted to cut Zen into two. Zen. Esther had confidence in Zen's abilities. She believed that after he attained the life and death realm, his strength had also improved greatly. She was just worried that Zen might not be a match for the Soul Sea Realm martial artists. However, she hadn't seen him for a long time, so she wasn't too sure about his strength levels now that he had become a war sage. Therefore, she was a bit apprehensive, especially when she saw that Zen wasn't dodging the attack at all. Clang! Zen's gaze was unwavering as the saber landed on his body. His body was strong as a sacred weapon, but in this great world, he didn't need to rely on his body. He had transferred the power of the saber to the magnetic sacred mountain, so the strike didn't really have much of an effect on him. Your name is Soroyan, right? Zen asked coolly. Soroyan's jaw dropped in shock. His strike had cost him 100% of forceful energy, and yet Zen stood there without batting an eyelid. Like other ogres, Soroyan was reckless but smart. He despised Zen, but in fact, he had weighed Zen's strength in his heart, so he had used up 100% of his strength in the very first strike itself. He'd never thought that such a powerful strike would not hurt Zen at all. Was Zen really a first-level war sage? How did you know my name? Soroyan spluttered. He was shocked and puzzled all at once. You have been in this world for 192 years, 3 months, 13 days, said Zen with a straight face. How did you know that? Soroyan was truly flummoxed now. Esther, too, was staring at Zen in amazement. There were just a few Soul Sea Realm martial artists in the Sea God continent, but there were quite a few war sages in the races, especially in the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place, the Dread Ogre Sacred Place and the Demon Knight. Zen was able to recognize this ogre war sage with absolute accuracy, right down to his age, including the month and day. Even the highly skilled intelligence system of the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place wouldn't be so accurate. It was a mystery as to how Zen got this information. Zen did not answer Soroyan's question. He only shook his head in mock sadness. But you will die right here, right now. Saying this, Zen gripped Soroyan's saber, and the power of 1,000 dragon scales flowed out from within his body. This amount of power was more than enough to kill a martial artist of this level. Clang! The mid-grade sacred weapon in Soroyan's hand broke apart right from the center. Pure terror filled Soroyan's heart. It was not just Zen's strength that frightened him, there was something eerie about him. It was almost as if Zen was omniscient and understood everything about him. Soroyan turned around, hoping to escape him. The ogre who was famed for his aggressiveness had actually chosen to flee after a single strike. You want to flee? No way. Zen's gaze was unfaltering. He turned his body into a thin line and caught up with Soroyan in a flash. His hand was already on Soroyan's neck. Immediately after, a ripping sound was heard, and with Zen's immense power, the ogre war sage's head was separated from his body. Esther watched this scene in stunned silence. She was tongue-tied. She knew that after Zen became a war sage, he would become much stronger. But she didn't expect his strength to be quite so much. War sages were divided into 9 levels, and just like the life and death realm, martial artists had to undergo a small heavenly tribulation on each level. Some martial artists had already broken through to the Soul Sea realm when they became 5th or 6th level war sages. Soroyan was a war sage at the later stage. Yet, he was killed by a single strike from Zen. Only Soul Sea realm martial artists could kill a 4th level ogre war sage so easily. When Zen was a 1st level warlord, he was able to fight against a 1st level war sage. Could it be that he had maintained such outstanding strength and fought against Soul Sea realm martial artists? Actually, Esther's guess was not totally correct. Although Zen's body was strong enough to fight against Soul Sea realm martial artists, he lacked a crucial component, which was his own domain. After merging with the will of the great world, Zen was linked with the world. As long as the world was not destroyed, it was impossible for him to be killed. But, if a Soul Sea realm martial artist used his domain and severed the connection between Zen and the world, then he would be in grave danger. However, the power he was displaying at this point was truly impressive. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the sky above the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place, over 100 beams of light were still rapidly zigzagging among each other. The Demon Knight was currently at a complete disadvantage. Seeing this, Zen asked, Esther, you still haven't answered my question. How can the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place dare to attack the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place? Where is Amber? Esther's face revealed a trace of bitterness. She is undergoing a tribulation. You mean the big heavenly tribulation? Zen asked. Yes, the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place are taking advantage of this opportunity to attack our sacred place, Esther explained angrily. When one reached the life and death realm, they would become a war sage. At this stage, one had to undergo heavenly tribulations. Small heavenly tribulations were for the life and death realm warriors, while big heavenly tribulations were for the Soul Sea realm warriors. The big heavenly tribulation was more terrifying than the small one. Although Amber's talent was impressive, the big heavenly tribulation was undoubtedly very challenging. In the past, the Tower of Sin had maintained a delicate balance within the sea god continent, and therefore, many races lived on friendly terms with each other, never offending each other openly. If Amber had undergone the big heavenly tribulation at that time, the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place would not have risked attacking the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. But now the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place had lost the access to the Tower of Sin. After the Demon Knight and the humans quickly grew stronger, it would be only a matter of time before they were completely destroyed. Thus, when Amber was undergoing the big heavenly tribulation, they had chosen to stake everything on one throw. Chapter 920, 3 Arrows. I see, that's how it is, Zen said as he nodded. At that exact time, a massive flame suddenly blazed up in the sky. The sudden explosion was shaped like a volcano, and the heat waves it emitted scorched the plants in the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. They weren't the only things affected by the blaze, however. Even the war sages weren't able to withstand the heat that was coming from the flames. Every one of them hid behind something, hoping to be spared by the fire's power. As the flame spread out, an ogre slowly arose from it. On the ogre's head was a three-pronged crown. He was wearing a golden armor and was holding a dark golden ghost staff in his hand. To say that he looked magnificent would be an understatement. A blue-clothed woman was who he was after. Her slender body was enveloped in a light blue water pattern domain, blocking all of the flames outside its protection. However, no matter how hard she tried, she just could not get rid of the ogre chasing after her. Lacey. Seeing this, Esther became worried. Zen had met Lacey before. She was a Soul Sea Realm expert from Demon Knight. The Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place had occupied the Tower of Sin for the longest time, as they had 3 Soul Sea Realm experts more than the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place. That advantage, however, was easily cancelled by Amber, as she was more than a match for 3 or 4 ogres at the Soul Sea Realm. With her being able to easily overpower them, the two sides had been able to maintain a delicate balance. Lacey, on the other hand, was obviously not as lucky as her. Right now, she was being suppressed by the ogre at the Soul Sea Realm. Esther and all the other Demon Knight war sages who were in the middle of a fierce battle with the ogre war sages, had dejected looks on their faces the moment the scene unfurled in front of their eyes. It greatly undermined their morale. Lacey, 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 the ogre said, chuckling, the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place is destined to be removed from the Sea God continent, so there's no point resisting. All of you are beautiful, you can just be us ogres, concubines. That's way better than being killed. Am I right? Amidst all this shaming, Lacey remained calm and the water pattern domain around her stayed sturdy. Even if you successfully destroy the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place, the moment Amber returns, you ogres will sure pay a heavy price, she said coldly. Lamar, do you really think Amber will let you off? Amber was looked up to in the Sea God continent as much as Zen was idolized in the central region. Both were considered the strongest warriors of their respective areas. With that, everyone knew that as long as Amber had the chance, she would not hesitate to kill all the Soul Sea Realm experts of the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place. Lacey's threat, however, didn't scare Lamar one bit. Instead, he laughed even more arrogantly. Amber, do you really think that she's going to come back here and save your sorry rear? He said, sneering. I know that she went to the 100-Mile Island to undergo tribulation. Did you really think you could keep it secret from us? Hearing these words, Lacey was evidently taken aback. Indeed, Amber quietly left for the 100-Mile Island in order to undergo her tribulation. Only a few members of the Demon Knight knew about this, so how did Lamar know? Who told him, she thought. As she was sure that no member of the Demon Knight would betray the sect, this only meant that the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place and the Dread Ogre Sacred Place had been tracking Amber's activities for some time now. To martial artists, undergoing tribulation was extremely dangerous. They could not be disturbed at all as they were in their most vulnerable states. If the ogres had known of Amber's whereabouts, she might be in grave danger now. Lacey's expression began to darken. The water pattern domain she put around herself as a protective barrier began to move erratically. Amber was the only hope of the Demon Knight. If she died, the Heavenly Feather Sacred Place would not stand a chance against the ogres, and would lose all its chance to be able to be rebuilt. Amused by the reaction he was able to solicit from Lacey, Lamar continued his verbal attack. Do you think that the Flaming Ogre Sacred Place was the only one taking action? Uh-oh little missy, you're mistaken. The people from the Dread Ogre Sacred Place have already been going after Amber for a long time. Haha, I have already told Harlow to keep Amber's severed head and soak it in the ogre's secret medicine. With her beauty, she could be the perfect ornament for the flaming ogre palace. As they were talking, 6 war sages of the demon knight were killed by the ogres. Waves of mournful cries resounded throughout the entire heavenly feather sacred place. Lamar became fired up as he saw how gallant the ogre war sages had been. His eyes were burning with passion as he stared at Lacey. Chuckling, he said, "If you don't surrender, I will cut off your head and place it in my bedroom." With that, he wielded the ghost staff in his hand and charged at Lacey once again. The raging flames on his body became even more intense. The water pattern domain around Lacey's body, on the other hand, became increasingly unstable as this happened. It seemed like she was going to be defeated. At that moment, Zen took out his dark golden longbow and 3 black arrows from his space ring. "Zen," Esther called immediately in an attempt to stop him from doing whatever he was planning to do. While Zen was an undoubtedly powerful being, Esther didn't think that he had a chance of defeating a powerful warrior at the Soul Sea realm. To rashly attack someone with that kind of level was suicide. However, Zen's expression told her that he would not back down. Soon, he already had the 3 black arrows notched on his longbow. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The bowstring began to hum softly. Afterwards, Zen launched the 3 black arrows into the air. They all turned into 3 streaks of black light, all coming towards Lamar at an incredibly fast speed. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At first, the 3 flying arrows weren't easily noticeable. After all, the entire sky above the heavenly feather sacred place was a complete mess, and the 3 black rays of light did not particularly stand out. Because of that, Lamar did not notice the 3 arrows rapidly approaching him. He continued running towards Lacey with a crazed smile. "It's useless to resist," he roared. "We ogres are destined to trample on all the other races in the entire sea god continent. Give you." But before he could even finish what he was trying to say, he heard 3 extremely loud cracks. Crack, crack, crack. Puzzled, he turned his head to look for their source. As he did so, he heard another 3 cracks. The sound came from the arrows as they accelerated through the air. At that point, they were already coming towards Lamar faster than the speed of light. "What are those?" Lamar asked, confused and stunned, as he felt the speed and power of the 3 black lights coming towards him. Terror suddenly took a hold of him. Lacey, who was struggling to hold on to her protective barrier, also noticed the 3 black lights that were fast approaching. Her eyes were suddenly filled with surprise and uncertainty. Quickly, she traced where the black lights came from and saw a young human. "Zen, why is he here?" she thought, confused. The 3 black lights were coming on so fast that Lamar gave up the idea of dodging them. "I'll take this head on," he thought, preparing for the impact. His bronze-colored arm, which was as thick as a human torso, swung the giant ghost staff, which was as big as a tree trunk. He violently smashed it towards the 3 black arrows. The ogres were indeed powerful, but the development of civilization in the Sea God continent was far inferior to that of the Divine Kingdom continent. It was even slower than that of the Central region. The ogres could, at most, refine a mid-grade sacred weapon. On the other hand, weapon refiners from the 4 divine kingdoms could even make divine weapons. Of course, refining a divine weapon usually required help from the upper world. Without the reverse spirit channel, the 4 divine kingdoms wouldn't have the ability to forge those kinds of weapons. Thus, the ghost staff in Lamar's hand was only a top-grade sacred weapon. While Lamar was swinging his ghost staff at the 3 black arrows, trying to prevent them from hitting him, he heard 3 muffled sounds. Then, out of the blue, the 3 sharp arrows pierced his body. Lamar never underestimated the power of the 3 black arrows. The moment he saw them, he immediately dropped his attack on Lacey, and instead, focused all his energy on blocking them. However, the moment the black arrows penetrated his ghost staff, he realized that despite all the precautions he made, he still severely underestimated their power.